The Burgundians emerged from the dense forest and marshy lowlands of what is now northern Poland and the southern Baltic coast during the first 2 centuries of the Common Era, their earliest settlements clustering along the meandering banks of the Vistula river system. Archaeological excavations conducted throughout the 20th and early 21st centuries have revealed a distinctive material culture that sets the early Burgundians apart from their Germanic neighbours, particularly through their metalworking techniques and burial practices. The Veilbach culture, which dominated this region from approximately 1 AD to 450 AD, provides the clearest archaeological window into early Burgundian society, though scholars continue to debate the precise ethnic boundaries within this broader cultural complex. Excavations at sites like Kowaliko and Grzybowo have uncovered substantial evidence of Burgundian craftsmanship, particularly in their distinctive brooches and weapon manufacture. The archaeological record reveals a people skilled in iron production, with furnaces capable of reaching temperatures sufficient for creating high-quality steel weapons. Their fibulae, characterized by intricate spiral designs and animal motifs, demonstrate sophisticated metalworking techniques that would later influence their material culture as they moved westward. Unlike the simpler geometric patterns favoured by many contemporary Germanic tribes, Burgundian artisans incorporated complex zoomorphic elements that suggest both artistic sophistication and specific religious symbolism. The settlement patterns evident from archaeological surveys indicate that early Burgundian communities favoured elevated positions near river confluences, providing both defensive advantages and access to trade routes. These settlements typically consisted of rectangular longhouses constructed with timber frames and wattle and daub walls, capable of housing extended family groups of 15 to 20 individuals. The presence of specialised craft workshops within these settlements, identified through concentrations of metalworking debris and partially finished artefacts, suggests a degree of economic specialisation unusual among contemporary Germanic tribes. Burial practices provide particularly rich insights into early Burgundian society and belief systems. The archaeological evidence from cemeteries like those at Veklis reveals a warrior culture that placed tremendous emphasis on martial prowess and individual achievement. Male burials frequently contain elaborate weapon sets, including pattern-welded swords, iron spearheads with distinctive leaf-shaped blades, and round shields with iron bosses decorated with geometric patterns. The quality and quantity of grave goods vary significantly between burials, indicating a stratified society where military leaders and successful warriors accumulated considerable wealth and prestige. Women's burials from this period reveal their own forms of social stratification, with elite females interred alongside intricate jewellery, amber beads imported from Baltic shores, and textile implements that suggest their role in high-status craft production. The presence of Roman coins and imported glass vessels in some female graves indicates that Burgundian women participated in long-distance trade networks and held significant economic authority within their communities. Particularly notable are the discoveries of elaborate brooches and necklaces that combine local amber with imported materials, demonstrating the sophisticated trade connections that early Burgundian settlements maintained with both Roman territories and other Germanic tribes. The linguistic evidence for early Burgundian language presents a complex picture that scholars have painstakingly reconstructed. Through comparative analysis with related East Germanic dialects, Burgundian belonged to the East Germanic branch of the Germanic language family, sharing significant features with Gothic and Vandalic while maintaining distinctive characteristics that set it apart from West and North Germanic languages. The limited surviving textual evidence, primarily consisting of personal names, place names, and legal terminology preserved in later Latin sources, provides tantalizing glimpses into the phonological and morphological structure of the language. Analysis of Burgundian personal names recorded in later historical sources reveals distinctive linguistic patterns that help scholars trace the language's development and geographic distribution. Names like Gundahar, Gislaharius, and Godomar demonstrate the characteristic East Germanic treatment of certain consonant clusters and vowel systems that differentiated Burgundian from contemporary dialects. The preservation of certain archaic Germanic features, such as the retention of final syllables that were lost in other branches, suggests that Burgundian maintained conservative linguistic characteristics, even as other Germanic languages underwent rapid changes. The relationship between Burgundian and Gothic presents particular interest for historical linguists, as both languages shared innovations that distinguished them from other Germanic dialects. Both languages underwent similar sound changes in their treatment of Proto-Germanic consonant clusters, and both developed comparable systems for expressing certain grammatical relationships. However, Burgundian appears to have retained certain features that Gothic had already lost by the time of Wulfila's Bible translation in the 4th century, suggesting either geographic isolation or deliberate conservative tendencies within Burgundian linguistic communities. Comparison with Vandalic, the other major East Germanic language for which substantial evidence survives, reveals both similarities and crucial differences that help illuminate the internal relationships within the East Germanic branch. While both languages shared certain phonological innovations and maintained similar vocabulary related to warfare and tribal organisation, Burgundian appears to have developed unique features in its treatment of certain vowel systems and its incorporation of loanwords from neighbouring Celtic and Baltic languages. The tribal structure of early Burgundian society reflected the broader patterns common among Germanic peoples, while maintaining distinctive features that would prove crucial to their later historical development. Archaeological and linguistic evidence suggests a society organised around extended kinship groups, led by war leaders who derived their authority from the combination of hereditary status, military success, and religious legitimacy. These leaders, known by titles that later sources preserve as variations of Hendinos and Sinistus, commanded the loyalty of warrior bands that formed the backbone of Burgundian military and political organisation. The warrior culture that dominated early Burgundian society centred around concepts of personal honour, martial prowess, and loyalty to charismatic leaders. Young men underwent initiation ceremonies that marked their transition from childhood to warrior status, receiving their first weapons in rituals that archaeological evidence suggests involved elaborate feasting and gift-giving ceremonies. The comitatus system, whereby young warriors attached themselves to successful leaders in exchange for weapons, protection and opportunities for glory, provided the organisational framework that enabled Burgundian military effectiveness and social cohesion. Archaeological evidence from weapon burials reveals the sophisticated military technology that supported Burgundian warrior culture. Their smiths produced pattern-welded swords, whose complex construction techniques created blades of exceptional strength and flexibility, often decorated with intricate designs that held both aesthetic and spiritual significance. The presence of specialised arrowheads, designed for different tactical purposes, from broad hunting points to narrow armour-piercing designs, indicates a military culture that had developed sophisticated approaches to both individual combat and coordinated battlefield tactics. The religious practices of early Burgundian communities combined elements common throughout the Germanic world with distinctive local traditions that reflected their specific geographic and cultural environment. Like most Germanic tribes, the Burgundians worshipped Woden as their primary deity, viewing him as the god of war, wisdom and death who guided warriors in battle and received the souls of those who died with weapons in hand. Archaeological evidence from cult sites along the Vistula suggests that Burgundian religious practices involved elaborate ritual deposits of weapons and jewellery in sacred groves and springs, offerings intended to secure divine favour for military expeditions and tribal prosperity. Ancestor veneration played a crucial role in Burgundian religious life, with evidence suggesting that prominent warriors and tribal leaders continued to influence community decisions long after their deaths. Burial sites reveal practices consistent with ongoing communication with deceased ancestors, including the periodic reopening of graves to add new offerings or remove items for ritual use. The presence of what appear to be shrine-like structures associated with certain elite burials indicates that particularly successful leaders might achieve a semi-divine status within their communities, their graves becoming focal points for religious ceremonies and tribal gatherings. The integration of seasonal agricultural festivals with warrior cult practices created a religious calendar that reinforced both military values and community cohesion. Spring festivals celebrating the renewal of military campaigns after winter inactivity involved elaborate weapon ceremonies and the initiation of young warriors, while autumn celebrations marked the return of successful war bands and the distribution of plunder among tribal members. These seasonal observances strengthened the bonds between warriors and their communities, while maintaining the religious traditions that legitimized tribal leadership and social organization. During the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries, the relatively stable world of the early Burgundians began to experience pressures that would ultimately force them to abandon their ancestral territories along the Vistula. The expansion of Hunnic power from the eastern steppes created a domino effect of tribal migrations that disrupted the established balance of power throughout the Germanic world. While the Huns themselves did not initially penetrate as far west as Burgundian territories, their pressure on Gothic and other East Germanic tribes created a cascade of displacement that gradually affected all the peoples of the region. Climate changes during this period compounded the political pressures facing Burgundian communities. Paleoclimatic evidence suggests that the 3rd century witnessed a period of cooling temperatures and increased precipitation that made traditional agricultural practices more difficult and reduced the carrying capacity of the land. Archaeological evidence from Burgundian settlements shows signs of increasing stress during this period, with smaller house sizes, reduced craft production, and changes in burial practices that suggest communities under pressure. The combination of external military threats and environmental challenges created conditions that made westward migration increasingly attractive to Burgundian leaders. Roman sources begin to mention Burgundian groups along the Rhine frontier during the mid-3 RD century, suggesting that the migration process had begun by this time. The decision to abandon ancestral territories represented a fundamental transformation in Burgundian society, requiring new forms of organisation and leadership capable of managing the complex logistics of moving entire communities across hundreds of miles of contested territory. The archaeological record from the latest phases of Burgundian occupation along the Vistula reveals a society in transition, with evidence of increased weapon production, changes in settlement patterns that suggest preparation for mobility, and the appearance of new burial practices that may reflect the spiritual preparations necessary for such a momentous undertaking. The material culture of this transitional period shows influences from multiple sources, suggesting that Burgundian communities were already beginning to adapt to the multicultural environment they would encounter as they moved westward into the Roman frontier zone. The transformation of Burgundian society from settled communities along the Vistula to mobile warrior bands capable of crossing the Rhine represented one of the most dramatic demographic shifts in late antiquity. By the closing decades of the 4th century, Burgundian tribal confederations had completed their westward journey across the North European plain, establishing temporary settlements along the Middle Rhine Valley while maintaining the military organisation necessary for continued expansion. Archaeological evidence from sites like Mainz and Speyer reveals the presence of distinctively Burgundian metalwork and burial practices dating to this transitional period, indicating that substantial populations had successfully navigated the complex political landscape of the Roman frontier zone. The winter of 406 AD marked a pivotal moment in European history, as unprecedented cold temperatures froze the Rhine solid enough to support the crossing of entire tribal populations with their wagons, livestock, and accumulated possessions. Contemporary sources, particularly the chronicler Prosper of Aquitaine, describe the river as frozen so thoroughly that armed warriors could march across its surface without breaking through the ice. The Burgundians, along with their Vandal and Alan allies, had spent months preparing for this crossing, accumulating supplies and coordinating their movements to maximise their chances of overwhelming Roman frontier defences through sheer numbers and coordinated timing. The crossing itself involved approximately 80,000 Burgundians organised into family groups, led by their traditional war leaders, each group responsible for transporting their own weapons, tools and essential supplies across the treacherous river surface. Archaeological analysis of abandoned campsites along the eastern Rhine bank reveals the scale of preparation involved, with evidence of massive stockpiles of preserved food, temporary forge installations for last-minute weapon repairs, and burial sites containing individuals who died during the harsh winter months preceding the crossing. The material remains suggest a highly organised operation rather than a desperate flight, with tribal leaders coordinating logistics on a scale that required sophisticated planning and communication networks. The initial Roman response to this massive incursion proved inadequate to contain the scale of the invasion. The Rhine frontier, already weakened by decades of troop withdrawals to support imperial campaigns in other theatres, could not muster sufficient forces to prevent the crossing or contain the subsequent dispersal of tribal groups throughout Gaul. Stilicho, the powerful Magister Militum, who effectively controlled the Western Roman Empire during Emperor Honorius's minority, found himself confronting a crisis that threatened to destabilise the entire Gallic prefecture, while simultaneously managing Gothic pressures in Italy and usurpation attempts in Britain. The Burgundians demonstrated remarkable tactical flexibility during their initial campaigns in Gaul, avoiding direct confrontations with major Roman field armies, while systematically occupying strategic positions that controlled river crossings and trade routes. Unlike the Vandals, who pursued a strategy of rapid movement toward the Mediterranean coast, or the Alans, who scattered into smaller raiding bands, the Burgundians maintained their tribal cohesion while establishing fortified positions that could serve as bases for further expansion or negotiation with Roman authorities. Their choice of targets reveals sophisticated intelligence gathering, as they consistently occupied sites with existing infrastructure suitable for supporting large populations, while avoiding heavily defended urban centres that would require costly siege operations. The transformation of these initial military successes into a recognised political entity required delicate negotiations with Roman imperial authorities, who faced the practical reality of their inability to expel the invaders through military force alone. The concept of foederity status, whereby barbarian tribes received official recognition as allied troops in exchange for military service and territorial grants, provided a framework that served both Roman administrative needs and Burgundian desires for legitimacy. Emperor Honorius, advised by his court officials who understood the strategic value of converting enemies into allies, authorised negotiations that would fundamentally alter the political landscape of Eastern Gaul. The diplomatic process that led to Burgundian foederati status involved complex negotiations conducted through intermediaries who could navigate both Roman legal traditions and Germanic concepts of honour and obligation. Roman negotiators, likely including bishops who served as neutral parties acceptable to both sides, worked to establish terms that would provide the Burgundians with secure territorial grants, while binding them to provide military service against other barbarian groups threatening imperial territories. The Burgundians, led by King Gundahar, whose name appears in contemporary Roman sources as Guntharius, brought their own diplomatic traditions, emphasising personal oaths and reciprocal obligations that had to be reconciled with Roman legal frameworks. The establishment of the First Burgundian Kingdom around Worms in 413 AD represented a remarkable achievement in early medieval state-building, creating a functioning political entity that combined Germanic tribal traditions with Roman administrative practices. The choice of Worms as their capital demonstrated strategic thinking, as the city controlled important Rhine crossings, while possessing existing urban infrastructure capable of supporting a royal court and administrative apparatus. Archaeological excavations in the Worms area have revealed evidence of substantial Burgundian settlement during this period, including distinctive grave goods, modified Roman buildings adapted for Germanic use, and workshop areas producing the characteristic metalwork that marked Burgundian material culture. King Gundahar's court at Worms developed into a sophisticated political centre that attracted not only Burgundian nobles, but also Roman administrators, merchants and clerics who recognised the opportunities presented by this new political arrangement. The royal household maintained Germanic traditions of warrior loyalty and gift-giving, while adopting Roman practices of written record-keeping and formal diplomatic protocol. Contemporary sources describe elaborate feasting ceremonies where Burgundian nobles received weapons and jewellery from their king, while Roman officials participated in negotiations conducted according to imperial legal procedures. The integration of Burgundian settlers with existing Gallo-Roman populations proceeded through a complex process of accommodation and adaptation that varied significantly across different regions and social levels. In rural areas, Burgundian warriors often received grants of land that had been abandoned or confiscated from Roman owners who had fled during the initial invasion, while in some cases they established new settlements on previously uncultivated territories. The archaeological record reveals evidence of both segregated communities where Burgundians maintained their traditional settlement patterns and mixed communities where Germanic and Roman material cultures began to blend. The legal framework governing these interactions drew upon both Roman provincial law and Germanic customary practices, creating hybrid systems that addressed the practical needs of governing mixed populations. Burgundian nobles retained authority over their own followers according to traditional tribal law, while interactions with Roman citizens often fell under modified versions of imperial legal procedures. This dual system required constant negotiation and adjustment, with local bishops and Roman administrators often serving as mediators in disputes between different legal traditions. Economic relationships between Burgundians and Gallo-Romans developed along lines that reflected both groups' practical needs and existing power structures. Burgundian warriors, trained primarily in military skills, often depended upon Roman craftsmen and merchants for manufactured goods and luxury items, while their control of agricultural land and trade routes provided them with the resources necessary to purchase these products. The archaeological evidence reveals increasing standardization of pottery styles and metalwork techniques during this period, suggesting active cultural exchange and economic integration despite political and legal distinctions. The religious landscape of the Burgundian kingdom presented particular challenges, as the overwhelming majority of Gallo-Romans had adopted Christianity, while the Burgundians remained committed to their traditional Germanic religious practices. King Gundahar and his nobles maintained their devotion to Woden and other Germanic deities, while recognizing the political necessity of accommodating Christian subjects and maintaining diplomatic relations with Christian Roman authorities. This religious plurality required careful management to prevent conflicts that could destabilize the kingdom's internal cohesion or its external relationships. Archaeological evidence from religious sites in the Worms region reveals the coexistence of Germanic cult practices with Christian worship, often within remarkably close geographic proximity. Excavations of uncovered weapon deposits and ritual animal sacrifices characteristic of Germanic religious observances, alongside Christian church foundations and burial grounds that follow Roman Christian practices. This religious diversity appears to have been managed through territorial separation and mutual tolerance rather than syncretistic blending, with each community maintaining its distinct religious identity while participating in shared economic and political structures. The military organisation of the Burgundian kingdom combined traditional Germanic warrior bands with innovations necessary for defending fixed territorial boundaries and fulfilling feudatory obligations to the Roman Empire. The royal army maintained the traditional structure of noble-led war bands, bound to the king through personal loyalty oaths, but these units were supplemented by territorial militias responsible for local defence and garrison duties. Archaeological evidence reveals the continued production of traditional Burgundian weapons, alongside the adoption of Roman military equipment and tactics suitable for siege warfare and coordinated field operations. The kingdom's military effectiveness was demonstrated through successful campaigns against Germanic raiders and other barbarian groups that threatened both Burgundian territories and Roman interests in the region. These operations required coordination between Burgundian forces and Roman field armies, creating military relationships that strengthened the political alliance, while providing Burgundian warriors with opportunities to acquire plunder and prestige through traditional means. The success of these joint operations reinforced the value of the feudatory arrangement for both parties, while establishing the Burgundians as a significant military power in their own right. The prosperity of the Worms kingdom during its early decades attracted additional Germanic settlers and refugees from other tribal groups, displaced by continuing migrations and conflicts. This population growth strengthened Burgundian military capabilities, while creating new challenges for resource management and internal governance. Archaeological surveys reveal evidence of expanding settlement areas and increased agricultural production during this period, suggesting successful adaptation to their new territorial base and growing economic prosperity. The cultural flowering that accompanied political stability manifested itself in distinctive art forms that combined Germanic traditions with influences absorbed from contact with Roman and other cultures. Burgundian metalworkers developed new techniques for decorating weapons and jewellery that incorporated motifs from multiple sources while maintaining recognisably Burgundian characteristics. The archaeological record reveals increasingly sophisticated craftsmanship in both utilitarian and ceremonial objects, indicating the presence of specialised artisans capable of producing goods for both local consumption and long-distance trade. However, the very success of the Burgundian kingdom created conditions that would ultimately lead to its destruction. The growing power and prosperity of Gundahar's realm attracted the attention of Attila the Hun, whose expanding empire sought to eliminate potential rivals while extracting tribute from settled populations. The Huns' demand for submission and tribute payments conflicted fundamentally with Burgundian concepts of royal honour and tribal independence, creating an irreconcilable conflict that neither diplomatic negotiation nor military deterrence could resolve. The Roman Empire's relationship with the Burgundians became increasingly complicated as Hunnic pressure intensified throughout the 430s. While the Burgundians had proven valuable allies in containing other barbarian groups, their growing independence and military strength raised concerns among Roman administrators who feared the emergence of another Gothic-style kingdom that might eventually threaten imperial authority directly. The convergence of Roman strategic concerns with Hunnic expansion created the conditions for the catastrophic events of 436 AD, when combined Hunnic and Roman forces launched the devastating assault that would destroy the Worms kingdom and scatter its population across Gaul. The catastrophic destruction of the Burgundian kingdom at Worms in 436 AD left the surviving population scattered across Gaul, their political unity shattered and their military strength decimated. Contemporary sources, including the chronicler Hodasius and later Gallic annals, describe the aftermath as a humanitarian crisis of unprecedented scale, with refugee columns stretching for miles along Roman roads as displaced Burgundians sought shelter and sustenance wherever they could find it. The survivors faced not only the immediate challenges of finding food and shelter, but also the complex task of maintaining their cultural identity and social structures without the institutional framework of their former kingdom. The Roman response to this crisis reflected both pragmatic administrative concerns and genuine humanitarian considerations. Emperor Valentinian III, ruling from Ravenna under the guidance of his mother, Galla Placidia, and the powerful General Aetius, recognized that the displaced Burgundians represented both a potential security threat and a valuable military resource if properly managed. The imperial administration had learned from previous experiences with barbarian settlements that successful integration required careful planning, adequate resources, and clear legal frameworks that could accommodate Germanic social structures within Roman provincial administration. Aetius, whose military genius had already demonstrated itself in campaigns against various barbarian groups and usurpers, understood that the Burgundian survivors possessed military skills and organizational capabilities that could serve imperial interests if channeled effectively. His previous interactions with Germanic tribes had taught him that successful foederati arrangements required respecting tribal leadership structures while establishing clear obligations and territorial boundaries. The general strategic vision encompassed not merely the immediate problem of refugee resettlement, but the longer-term goal of creating a stable buffer zone against further barbarian incursions from across the Rhine. The selection of Sapaudia as the destination for Burgundian resettlement demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both geographic and political factors that would influence the success of this ambitious undertaking. The region, encompassing much of modern Savoy and extending into adjacent areas of what would become Switzerland and southeastern France, offered several crucial advantages for establishing a new Burgundian homeland. The mountainous terrain provided natural defensive barriers that would make the territory easier to defend against external threats, while the fertile valleys contained sufficient agricultural land to support substantial populations. Archaeological surveys conducted throughout the Sapaudia region have revealed evidence of existing Gallo-Roman settlements and villa complexes that could provide immediate shelter and infrastructure for incoming Burgundian families. These established communities possessed the agricultural knowledge and equipment necessary for successful farming in the region's specific climatic and soil conditions, while their existing trade connections could facilitate the economic integration of Burgundian settlers. The presence of Roman administrative centres at locations like Geneva and Vienne provided institutional frameworks that could be adapted to accommodate the hybrid governance systems necessary for managing mixed populations. The actual process of resettlement, beginning around 443 AD, involved complex logistical operations that required coordination between Roman provincial administrators, Burgundian tribal leaders, and local Gallo-Roman communities. Imperial officials conducted detailed surveys of available land, assessing both the carrying capacity of different areas and the existing population densities that would affect integration prospects. Burgundian leaders, meanwhile, worked to maintain clan and family groupings during the relocation process, recognizing that preserving these traditional social bonds would be crucial for maintaining cultural continuity in their new homeland. The legal framework governing this resettlement drew upon established Roman precedents for barbarian foederati, while incorporating specific provisions designed to address the unique circumstances of the Burgundian situation. The hospitalitas system, whereby barbarian settlers received grants of land and resources in exchange for military service obligations, provided the basic structure for these arrangements. However, the Burgundian settlement required modifications to accommodate their larger numbers and more complex social organisation compared to previous foederati groups. Under these arrangements, Burgundian nobles received substantial land grants that enabled them to maintain their traditional roles as leaders of warrior bands while accepting overall Roman administrative authority. The size and quality of these grants reflected both the military value of the recipients and the practical availability of suitable territories within the designated settlement zones. Archaeological evidence from elite Burgundian burials in Sapaudia reveals the continued accumulation of wealth and status symbols, indicating that the resettlement successfully preserved the social hierarchies that had characterized Burgundian society in their previous homeland. The integration of Burgundian military units into Roman defensive systems proceeded according to carefully negotiated agreements that balanced imperial strategic needs with Burgundian military traditions. Burgundian warriors retained their traditional weapons and fighting techniques, while accepting Roman command structures for coordinated operations against external threats. The archaeological record reveals continued production of distinctively Burgundian weapons and armour, alongside the adoption of Roman military equipment, suggesting a hybrid military culture that combined elements from both traditions. King Gundioch emerged as the dominant Burgundian leader during this crucial period of resettlement and reorganisation, his authority recognised both by his own people and by Roman imperial administrators who needed reliable partners for managing the complex challenges of integration. Contemporary sources describe Gundioch as a skilled diplomat who could navigate both Germanic concepts of personal honour and Roman legal procedures, making him an ideal intermediary for the delicate negotiations required to establish stable relationships between different communities within Sapaudia. Gundioch's consolidation of power among the scattered Burgundian groups required careful attention to traditional legitimacy sources while adapting to the new political realities of life within the Roman provincial system. He maintained the ceremonial aspects of Germanic kingship, including the elaborate gift-giving ceremonies that reinforced bonds between nobles and their followers, while establishing administrative practices that could interface effectively with Roman bureaucratic procedures. The royal court that developed around Gundioch combined Germanic warrior culture with Roman diplomatic protocols, creating a unique political environment that attracted ambitious individuals from both cultural backgrounds. The expansion of Burgundian territory under Gundioch's leadership proceeded through a combination of diplomatic negotiation, military pressure, and strategic alliance building that gradually extended their influence throughout the Rhone Valley system. This expansion was not merely territorial acquisition, but represented a systematic effort to create defensible boundaries and secure control over economically valuable resources. The Rhone River system provided crucial transportation routes that connected Mediterranean markets with northern European trade networks, while the surrounding agricultural lands offered the productive capacity necessary to support growing populations. Archaeological evidence from sites throughout the expanding Burgundian territories reveals the establishment of fortified positions at strategic locations that controlled river crossings and mountain passes. These fortifications combined Germanic defensive concepts with Roman engineering techniques, creating hybrid military architectures that reflected the cultural synthesis occurring throughout Burgundian society. The presence of both Germanic-style weapons deposits and Roman military equipment at these sites indicates the mixed composition of garrison forces and the continued evolution of Burgundian military practices. The development of Burgundian legal systems during this period represented one of the most significant achievements of early medieval jurisprudence, creating comprehensive legal codes that successfully integrated Germanic customary law with Roman legal principles. This synthesis was not merely theoretical, but addressed practical needs arising from the governance of mixed populations with different legal traditions and cultural expectations. The Burgundian legal system had to accommodate disputes between Germanic warriors and Roman citizens, regulate economic relationships between different communities, and establish procedures for criminal justice that both groups would accept as legitimate. The Lex Burgundianum, though compiled in its surviving form during later periods, reflects legal developments that began during Gundioch's reign as Burgundian administrators worked to create coherent legal frameworks for their expanding territories. The code's provisions reveal sophisticated understanding of both Germanic concepts of personal honour and Roman principles of written law, creating hybrid legal procedures that could address the complex disputes arising in multicultural societies. The emphasis on compensation payments rather than physical punishment reflected Germanic legal traditions, while the detailed procedural requirements demonstrated Roman influence on legal administration. Property law presented particular challenges in the Burgundian legal system, as it had to reconcile Germanic concepts of collective tribal ownership with Roman principles of individual property rights. The solutions developed by Burgundian legal scholars created innovative approaches to land tenure that protected both Germanic clan rights and Roman proprietary interests. Archaeological evidence from rural settlements reveals the practical implementation of these legal principles, with mixed communities developing land use patterns that reflected both cultural traditions while maintaining social harmony. The regulation of marriage and family relationships required similar synthesis between different cultural traditions, as Germanic and Roman societies had developed distinct approaches to kinship, inheritance, and gender roles. Burgundian law developed comprehensive provisions governing intermarriage between different ethnic groups, while preserving the essential elements of both Germanic and Roman family structures. The archaeological record from Burgundian cemeteries reveals burial practices that reflect these hybrid family arrangements, with grave goods and burial orientations that combine elements from multiple cultural traditions. Criminal law in the Burgundian system demonstrated particular sophistication in addressing the challenges of maintaining order in societies with different concepts of justice and punishment. The legal codes established clear procedures for investigating crimes, determining guilt, and imposing appropriate penalties while accommodating both Germanic traditions of personal vengeance and Roman principles of state-administered justice. The emphasis on monetary compensation and public reconciliation ceremonies reflected Germanic legal culture, while the detailed evidentiary requirements and procedural safeguards demonstrated Roman legal influence. The economic foundations of the Second Burgundian Kingdom rested upon successful integration of traditional Germanic economic practices with the sophisticated agricultural and commercial systems that characterized Gallo-Roman society. The Burgundians brought with them expertise in animal husbandry, metalworking, and certain forms of agriculture, while encountering Roman innovations in crop rotation, viticulture, and commercial organization that could significantly enhance their economic productivity. The archaeological record reveals rapid adoption of Roman agricultural techniques alongside the preservation of traditional Germanic craft production methods. Agricultural development in Burgundian territories proceeded through careful adaptation of Roman villa systems to accommodate Germanic social structures and land use patterns. The villa complexes that dotted the Sapaudia region provided existing infrastructure for large-scale agricultural production, while their associated workshops and storage facilities could support the craft production that remained central to Germanic economic culture. Archaeological excavations at sites like the villa complex near Annecy reveal modifications made during the Burgundian period that reflect the integration of Germanic and Roman agricultural practices. The preservation and adaptation of existing Gallo-Roman villa systems required careful negotiation between incoming Burgundian settlers and established local populations who possessed crucial knowledge about local agricultural conditions and techniques. These negotiations often resulted in complex arrangements whereby Roman agricultural specialists continued to manage day-to-day farming operations, while Burgundian nobles assumed overall ownership and control of the properties. The archaeological evidence suggests that these arrangements often proved mutually beneficial, with agricultural productivity increasing as Germanic and Roman techniques were combined. Craft production in Burgundian territories maintained traditional Germanic emphasis on metalworking and weapon manufacture, while incorporating Roman techniques and market structures that could support increased production and wider distribution. Archaeological evidence from workshop sites reveals the continued production of distinctively Burgundian metalwork alongside the adoption of Roman tools and techniques that enhanced both quality and efficiency. The presence of Roman-style pottery kilns and glassworking facilities at Burgundian sites indicates the rapid adoption of new craft technologies that could serve both local consumption and export markets. Trade relationships developed by the Burgundian kingdom took advantage of their strategic position along major transportation routes, connecting northern Europe with Mediterranean markets. The Rhone Valley system provided natural transportation corridors that Burgundian merchants could exploit, while their political control over strategic locations enabled them to collect customs duties and regulate commercial traffic. Archaeological evidence from trading centres like Lyon reveals the presence of Burgundian merchants and their distinctive products and commercial networks that extended throughout Gaul and into other parts of the Roman Empire. The integration of Burgundian economic activities with existing Roman commercial structures required adaptation of Germanic trading practices to accommodate Roman legal requirements and market expectations. Burgundian merchants had to learn Roman commercial law, accounting procedures, and quality standards, while Roman traders needed to understand Germanic concepts of personal honour and reciprocal obligation that influenced business relationships. The archaeological record reveals increasing standardization of weights, measures, and product quality during this period, suggesting successful integration of different commercial traditions. The death of Gundioch around 473 AD precipitated a succession crisis that would fundamentally reshape Burgundian political structures and establish the framework for the kingdom's most sophisticated period of legal and administrative development. Unlike the clear hereditary succession patterns that characterize many Germanic kingdoms, Burgundian tradition recognized multiple claimants among a deceased king's male relatives, creating opportunities for both internal conflict and innovative power-sharing arrangements. Gundobad, one of Gundioch's sons, emerged from this complex succession process not merely as king of the Burgundians, but as a figure who would successfully navigate the intricate political landscape of late 5th century Gaul while maintaining simultaneous positions within both Germanic and Roman power structures. Gundobad's rise to dominance required eliminating potential rivals among his own family members, a process that contemporary sources describe with the brutal efficiency characteristic of Germanic succession struggles. His brother Chilperic, who had established his own power base around Lyon, represented the most serious threat to unified Burgundian authority. The conflict between these brothers extended beyond mere personal ambition to encompass fundamental questions about the future direction of Burgundian political development, with Chilperic advocating closer integration with Roman administrative systems, while Gundobad favoured maintaining stronger Germanic institutional traditions. The resolution of this fraternal conflict through Chilperic's assassination around 493 AD eliminated the last significant internal challenge to Gundobad's authority, while simultaneously demonstrating the ruthless pragmatism that would characterize his approach to political problems throughout his reign. Archaeological evidence from Lyon reveals signs of violent destruction at several elite residences during this period, suggesting that the elimination of Chilperic involved systematic purges of his supporters and the redistribution of their properties among Gundobad's followers. The material remains indicate that this political violence was followed by rapid reconstruction and expansion of royal administrative facilities, suggesting efficient consolidation of power rather than prolonged instability. The unique aspect of Gundobad's political position lay in his simultaneous holding of both Germanic kingship and Roman imperial office, a dual role that required constant negotiation between competing sets of obligations and expectations. His appointment as Magister Militum per Gallius by Emperor Zeno in 474 AD recognized both his military capabilities and his strategic importance in maintaining Roman interests in southeastern Gaul. This position granted him command authority over imperial forces throughout the Gallic provinces, while requiring him to coordinate his policies with other Roman officials and maintain loyalty to imperial objectives that might conflict with purely Burgundian interests. The practical challenges of managing these dual roles required sophisticated administrative systems capable of distinguishing between Gundobad's actions as Germanic king and his responsibilities as Roman general. His court developed elaborate protocols for conducting business in different capacities, with separate ceremonial procedures for receiving Germanic nobles, seeking royal favour, and Roman officials requiring military coordination. Archaeological evidence from his primary residence at Lyon reveals architectural modifications that created distinct spaces for Germanic and Roman court functions, including a traditional Germanic hall for warrior assemblies alongside Roman-style administrative offices, equipped for managing imperial correspondence and military logistics. The military implications of Gundobad's dual position proved particularly complex, as he commanded both traditional Burgundian warrior bands bound to him through personal loyalty oaths and Roman military units operating under imperial command structures. These different military organizations required distinct approaches to recruitment, training and compensation, while somehow maintaining operational coordination when circumstances required joint action. The archaeological record reveals continued production of traditional Burgundian weapons alongside Roman military equipment, suggesting the maintenance of parallel military cultures within a unified command structure. Gundobad's campaigns against various threats to Burgundian and Roman interests demonstrated his ability to coordinate these different military resources effectively while advancing both Germanic and imperial objectives. His operations against Alemannic raiders in the Upper Rhine Valley protected both Burgundian territories and Roman frontier positions, while providing his warriors with opportunities for acquiring plunder and prestige through traditional means. The success of these campaigns reinforced his legitimacy among both his Germanic followers and Roman superiors, while establishing his reputation as one of the most effective military leaders in late 5th century Gaul. The promulgation of the Lex Burgundionum around 500 AD represented the culmination of decades of legal development and administrative experimentation, creating one of the most sophisticated legal codes of the early medieval period. This comprehensive legal system addressed the practical challenges of governing mixed populations with different cultural traditions, while establishing clear procedural frameworks that could accommodate both Germanic customary law and Roman legal principles. The code's development required extensive consultation with both Germanic legal experts who understood traditional tribal customs and Roman jurists familiar with imperial legal procedures. The structure of the Lex Burgundionum reveals careful attention to the hierarchical organisation of Burgundian society, while incorporating Roman concepts of written law and procedural regularity. The code established clear distinctions between different social classes, with separate legal provisions governing the rights and obligations of Burgundian nobles, free warriors, and various categories of dependents. These social distinctions reflected traditional Germanic concepts of honour and status, while incorporating Roman legal categories that could accommodate the complex social relationships that had developed in mixed communities. Property law within the Lex Burgundionum addressed the fundamental challenges of regulating land tenure in societies where Germanic collective ownership concepts coexisted with Roman individual property rights. The code established innovative legal mechanisms for transferring property between different ethnic groups while protecting the essential interests of both Germanic clans and Roman proprietors. Archaeological evidence from rural settlements reveals the practical implementation of these legal principles, with land use patterns that reflect successful integration of different ownership concepts while maintaining productive agricultural systems. The code's provisions governing criminal law demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the different approaches to justice that characterized Germanic and Roman legal traditions. Rather than simply imposing one system upon all inhabitants, the Lex Burgundionum created flexible procedures that could accommodate both Germanic concepts of personal honour and Roman principles of state-administered justice. The emphasis on monetary compensation and public reconciliation ceremonies reflected Germanic legal culture, while the detailed evidentiary requirements and procedural safeguards demonstrated Roman legal influence. Marriage and family law presented particular challenges for legal codification, as Germanic and Roman societies had developed distinct approaches to kinship relationships, inheritance patterns, and gender roles. The Lex Burgundionum established comprehensive provisions governing intermarriage between different ethnic groups, while preserving the essential elements of both Germanic and Roman family structures. The code's treatment of inheritance rights revealed careful balancing between Germanic traditions of collective clan ownership and Roman principles of individual testamentary disposition. The creation of the Lex Romana Burgundianum as a separate legal code, specifically governing Roman subjects within Burgundian territories, demonstrated Gundobad's sophisticated understanding of the administrative challenges involved in ruling mixed populations. Rather than attempting to force all inhabitants under a single legal system, this approach recognized that different communities required different legal frameworks while maintaining overall political unity under Burgundian royal authority. The Roman Code drew primarily upon the Theodosian Code and other established imperial legal sources, while incorporating specific modifications necessary for local conditions. The dual legal system created by these parallel codes required complex administrative machinery capable of determining which legal framework applied to specific cases while ensuring consistent application of legal principles across different communities. Gundobad's administration developed elaborate procedures for handling disputes that crossed ethnic boundaries, often requiring panels of judges familiar with both legal traditions to ensure fair resolution of complex cases. Archaeological evidence from administrative centres reveals the presence of both Germanic and Roman legal experts working within integrated judicial systems. The practical implementation of this dual legal system required extensive training programs for local administrators who needed to understand both legal traditions and the procedures for determining their appropriate application. Court records preserved in later sources reveal the development of sophisticated case law that addressed the inevitable conflicts and ambiguities arising from parallel legal systems. The success of these arrangements is demonstrated by the relative stability and prosperity that characterized Burgundian territories during Gundobad's reign, suggesting that the legal framework successfully addressed the practical needs of mixed populations. Religious policy under Gundobad required equally careful balancing between the Arian Christianity that had become dominant among Burgundian elites and the Catholic Christianity practiced by the majority of Gallo-Roman subjects. Gundobad's own conversion to Arian Christianity, probably occurring during his early career as a military leader, reflected both personal conviction and political calculation, as Arianism had become associated with Germanic royal authority throughout much of post-Roman Europe. However, his marriage to a Catholic wife and his tolerant policies towards Catholic clergy demonstrated his understanding that successful governance required accommodation of different religious traditions. The theological differences between Arian and Catholic Christianity, centering primarily on the nature of Christ's relationship to God the Father, had become deeply intertwined with ethnic and political identities throughout the former Roman Empire. Arian Christianity, with its emphasis on the subordination of the Son to the Father, appealed to Germanic concepts of hierarchical authority, while Catholic Trinitarian theology resonated with Roman intellectual traditions and established ecclesiastical structures. Gundobad's religious policies had to navigate these theological distinctions while preventing religious differences from undermining political stability. Archaeological evidence from religious sites throughout Burgundian territories reveals the coexistence of Arian and Catholic worship facilities, often within remarkably close geographic proximity. Excavations at sites like Vienne have uncovered both Arian churches built according to Germanic architectural traditions and Catholic basilicas following Roman ecclesiastical designs. The material remains suggest that these different religious communities maintained distinct liturgical practices and theological orientations, while participating in shared economic and political structures. Gundobad's approach to religious governance involved maintaining separate ecclesiastical hierarchies for Arian and Catholic communities while ensuring that religious differences did not interfere with secular administrative functions. Arian bishops, typically drawn from Burgundian noble families, provided religious leadership for Germanic communities, while Catholic bishops, often representing established Gallo-Roman ecclesiastical lineages, continued to serve Roman populations. The king's court maintained relationships with both hierarchies while avoiding direct involvement in theological disputes that could alienate either community. The diplomatic challenges arising from religious divisions extended beyond internal governance to encompass Gundobad's relationships with neighbouring kingdoms and the Byzantine Empire. His Arian faith aligned him with other Germanic kingdoms, particularly the Ostrogothic realm of Theodoric the Great, while creating potential conflicts with Catholic Frankish rulers and Byzantine imperial policies favouring Orthodox Christianity. These religious considerations significantly influenced Gundobad's foreign policy, decisions and alliance strategies throughout his reign. Territorial expansion under Gundobad proceeded through a combination of military conquest, diplomatic negotiation, and strategic marriage alliances that gradually extended Burgundian influence throughout southeastern Gaul, while maintaining generally peaceful relationships with neighbouring powers. The acquisition of additional territories required careful integration of new populations and resources, while avoiding conflicts that could destabilise existing arrangements with Roman imperial authorities or other Germanic kingdoms. Archaeological surveys reveal evidence of Burgundian settlement expansion during this period, with new fortified positions established at strategic locations that controlled important transportation routes and agricultural resources. The expansion of Burgundian territories brought increasing contact with the Ostrogothic Kingdom of Italy, creating opportunities for both cooperation and conflict between two of the most powerful Germanic realms in post-Roman Europe. Theodoric the Great's policies toward the Burgundians reflected his broader strategy of maintaining stable relationships with neighbouring Germanic kingdoms while preventing the emergence of hostile coalitions that could threaten Ostrogothic interests. The archaeological record reveals evidence of increased trade and cultural exchange between Burgundian and Ostrogothic territories during this period, with distinctive Ostrogothic metalwork and pottery appearing at Burgundian sites alongside traditional local products. Diplomatic relationships with the Visigothic kingdom centred in Toulouse required careful navigation of competing territorial claims and conflicting alliance obligations that could easily escalate into military confrontation. The Visigoths' expansion into southern Gaul brought them into direct contact with Burgundian territories along the Rhone Valley, creating potential flashpoints that required constant diplomatic attention to prevent escalation into open warfare. Marriage alliances between Burgundian and Visigothic royal families provided frameworks for managing these tensions, while creating new complications when dynastic disputes arose within either kingdom. The emergence of Frankish power under Clovis presented the most significant long-term challenge to Burgundian independence, as the Frankish kingdom's rapid expansion threatened to encircle Burgundian territories, while Clovis's conversion to Catholic Christianity provided him with potential allies among Gundobad's Gallo-Roman subjects. The religious dimension of this rivalry added theological legitimacy to what might otherwise have been purely territorial conflicts, with Catholic clergy potentially viewing Frankish expansion as divine judgment against Arian heresy. Gundobad's diplomatic responses to growing Frankish pressure required careful balancing between military deterrence and political accommodation, while maintaining the loyalty of his religiously diverse subjects. The gradual transformation of Burgundian religious practices from traditional Germanic paganism through Arian Christianity to eventual Catholic orthodoxy represented one of the most complex cultural negotiations in early medieval Europe, involving not merely theological conversion, but fundamental restructuring of social hierarchies, legal systems, and political legitimacy. The initial adoption of Arian Christianity by Burgundian elites during the late 5th century had provided a theological framework that accommodated Germanic concepts of hierarchical authority, while distinguishing Burgundian identity from their Catholic Gallo-Roman subjects. However, the practical challenges of governing mixed populations, combined with shifting diplomatic pressures from neighbouring Catholic kingdoms, created conditions that made religious transformation both politically necessary and culturally inevitable. The influence of Catholic Gallo-Roman subjects on Burgundian religious development operated through multiple channels that gradually eroded the theological and social barriers separating Arian and Catholic communities. Intermarriage between Burgundian nobles and prominent Gallo-Roman families created household environments where different religious traditions coexisted in intimate daily contact, with children exposed to both Arian and Catholic theological concepts from earliest childhood. Archaeological evidence from elite residential sites reveals the presence of both Arian and Catholic religious artifacts within the same household contexts, including distinctive liturgical vessels, religious jewellery, and devotional objects that suggest active participation in multiple religious traditions. The economic relationships that developed between Burgundian landowners and Gallo-Roman agricultural specialists created additional opportunities for religious interaction and influence. Catholic farmers, craftsmen, and merchants working on Burgundian estates brought with them not only technical expertise, but also religious practices that gradually influenced their Germanic employers through daily contact and shared participation in seasonal agricultural festivals. The archaeological record from rural settlements reveals the gradual adoption of Catholic religious symbols and burial practices among Burgundian communities, suggesting grassroots religious transformation that preceded and influenced elite conversion decisions. Catholic clergy played particularly crucial roles in this transformation process, serving as diplomatic intermediaries, legal advisors, and cultural bridges between different communities within Burgundian territories. Bishops like Avitus of Vienne possessed both theological expertise and political sophistication that made them valuable counsellors to Burgundian rulers grappling with complex administrative challenges. Their correspondence, preserved in various ecclesiastical archives, reveals sustained intellectual engagement with Burgundian nobles on questions ranging from legal theory to military strategy, demonstrating the practical utility of Catholic clerical education in secular governance. The theological arguments advanced by Catholic clergy in their interactions with Arian Burgundians focused less on abstract doctrinal disputes than on practical questions of religious authority and institutional legitimacy. Catholic bishops emphasized their connections to established ecclesiastical hierarchies that extended throughout the former Roman Empire, arguing that Catholic Christianity provided access to broader networks of religious and political support that could strengthen Burgundian diplomatic positions. The material evidence reveals increasing Burgundian patronage of Catholic religious institutions during the early 6th century, suggesting growing appreciation for the practical benefits of Catholic ecclesiastical connections. The conversion of King Sigismund to Catholic Christianity around 516 AD marked a decisive turning point in Burgundian religious development, representing not merely personal theological conviction, but calculated political strategy designed to strengthen the kingdom's position in an increasingly Catholic European diplomatic environment. Sigismund's decision to abandon the Arian faith of his father Gundobad required careful management to avoid alienating traditional Burgundian supporters, while signalling his commitment to Catholic orthodoxy to neighbouring rulers and potential allies. Contemporary sources describe elaborate conversion ceremonies that combine traditional Germanic concepts of royal authority with Catholic sacramental theology, creating hybrid religious rituals that could satisfy both cultural traditions. Sigismund's promotion of Catholic monasticism represented a particularly sophisticated approach to religious transformation that addressed both spiritual and political objectives simultaneously. Monastic communities provided institutional frameworks for preserving and transmitting Catholic theological traditions, while serving practical functions as centres of learning, agricultural innovation, and diplomatic communication. The king's patronage of monastic establishments demonstrated his commitment to Catholic orthodoxy while creating religious institutions that could contribute to the kingdom's economic and cultural development. The Abbey of Saint-Maurice, established through Sigismund's direct patronage around 515 AD, exemplified the successful integration of Catholic monastic traditions with Burgundian royal authority and Germanic cultural values. The abbey's location in the strategically important Rhone Valley provided both defensive advantages and access to major transportation routes, while its dedication to Saint Maurice, a Roman soldier martyred for his Christian faith, created symbolic connections between military valour and religious devotion that resonated with Germanic warrior culture. Archaeological excavations at the abbey site have revealed substantial royal investments in monastic infrastructure, including elaborate church buildings, residential quarters for monks, and workshop facilities for manuscript production and craft activities. The monastic community at Saint-Maurice attracted scholars and craftsmen from throughout Europe, creating an intellectual and artistic centre that contributed significantly to the cultural synthesis occurring throughout Burgundian territories. The abbey's scriptorium produced illuminated manuscripts that combined Germanic artistic motifs with Catholic theological content, while its workshops developed distinctive styles of metalwork and textile production that reflected the cultural fusion characterising Burgundian material culture during this period. The presence of monks from various ethnic backgrounds, including Romans, Franks, and other Germanic peoples, created a cosmopolitan religious community that served as a model for successful cultural integration. The abbey's economic activities extended far beyond traditional monastic functions to encompass agricultural innovation, craft production, and commercial activities that contributed substantially to regional economic development. Monastic estates established systematic approaches to crop rotation, animal husbandry, and land management that increased agricultural productivity while providing employment opportunities for local populations. The archaeological record reveals evidence of monastic involvement in mining operations, metalworking activities, and textile production that generated substantial revenues for both the abbey and the royal treasury. Sigismund's patronage of other monastic establishments throughout his territories created a network of Catholic religious institutions that served multiple functions within the kingdom's administrative and cultural systems. Monasteries like those at Agaun and Romain-Motier provided centres for theological education that trained clergy capable of serving both Burgundian and Gallo-Roman communities, while their economic activities contributed to regional prosperity and political stability. The monastic movement's emphasis on written record-keeping and legal documentation supported the kingdom's administrative development, while preserving historical and cultural information that would prove invaluable for later generations. The cultural fusion that characterised Burgundian society during the early 6th century manifested itself most clearly in the artistic and material culture that emerged from the interaction between Germanic traditions and Gallo-Roman customs. This synthesis was not merely superficial borrowing, but represented fundamental transformation of cultural practices that created distinctively Burgundian approaches to art, architecture, and daily life. The archaeological record reveals the emergence of hybrid artistic styles that combined Germanic symbolic systems with Roman technical expertise, creating material culture that was recognisably Burgundian while incorporating elements from multiple cultural traditions. Burgundian metalworking during this period demonstrated particular sophistication in combining traditional Germanic techniques with innovations learned from Roman craftsmen and imported from other cultural contacts. Archaeological evidence from workshop sites reveals the production of jewellery, weapons, and decorative objects that incorporated complex geometric patterns derived from Germanic artistic traditions, alongside figurative elements influenced by Roman and Byzantine artistic styles. The technical quality of these productions indicates the presence of highly skilled craftsmen capable of working with multiple metals and employing sophisticated decoration techniques. The development of distinctive Burgundian jewellery styles reflected both cultural synthesis and social differentiation within the kingdom's increasingly complex society. Elite women's jewellery from this period combines traditional Germanic fibulae and brooches with Roman-influenced necklaces and earrings, often incorporating precious stones and decorative techniques that demonstrate extensive trade connections and sophisticated artistic capabilities. The archaeological record reveals regional variations in jewellery styles that suggest local workshops developing distinctive approaches to combining different cultural influences while maintaining recognisably Burgundian characteristics. Weapon production continued to hold central importance in Burgundian material culture, reflecting the persistent significance of military prowess and warrior identity within Germanic social structures. However, the weapons produced during the early 6th century demonstrate significant evolution from earlier purely Germanic traditions, incorporating Roman engineering principles and decorative elements that created hybrid military technologies. Archaeological analysis of Burgundian swords from this period reveals sophisticated pattern welding techniques that created blades of exceptional strength and flexibility, often decorated with intricate designs that combined Germanic runic symbols with Christian religious motifs. The burial practices that developed in Burgundian territories during this period provide particularly clear evidence of cultural synthesis, as funeral customs necessarily addressed fundamental questions about religious belief, social status, and cultural identity. Archaeological excavations of Burgundian cemeteries reveal the gradual transition from traditional Germanic burial practices emphasizing grave goods and warrior identity to Christian burial customs focused on resurrection theology and religious community membership. However, this transition was not abrupt but involved complex negotiations between different cultural traditions that created hybrid burial practices reflecting multiple influences. The orientation and layout of Burgundian burial grounds demonstrate the practical challenges involved in accommodating different religious traditions within shared community spaces. Many cemeteries from this period reveal evidence of both pagan and Christian burial practices occurring simultaneously, with traditional Germanic grave goods appearing alongside Christian religious symbols in the same burial contexts. The archaeological evidence suggests that communities developed flexible approaches to burial practices that could accommodate different religious beliefs while maintaining social cohesion and cultural continuity. The grave goods associated with Burgundian burials during the early 6th century reflect the complex social and cultural transformations occurring throughout the kingdom. Elite burials continue to emphasize military equipment and luxury objects that demonstrated social status and cultural identity, but these traditional Germanic grave goods increasingly appear alongside Christian religious artifacts and Roman-influenced decorative objects. The presence of both pagan and Christian religious symbols in the same burial context suggests that cultural transformation involved synthesis rather than simple replacement of older traditions. Architectural development in Burgundian territories demonstrated similar patterns of cultural fusion, with building techniques and decorative styles that combined Germanic construction methods with Roman engineering principles and Christian architectural requirements. The archaeological record reveals the construction of churches that incorporated traditional Germanic wooden construction techniques with Roman stone masonry, creating distinctive architectural styles that reflected the cultural synthesis occurring throughout Burgundian society. These religious buildings often featured decorative elements that combined Christian symbolic systems with Germanic artistic motifs, creating visual environments that could appeal to diverse cultural audiences. Residential architecture also evolved during this period to accommodate the changing social and cultural needs of Burgundian communities. Elite residences increasingly incorporated Roman-style amenities like hypocauste heating systems and decorative mosaics, while maintaining Germanic architectural elements like great halls designed for communal feasting and warrior assemblies. The archaeological evidence reveals the modification of existing Roman villa complexes to accommodate Germanic social practices alongside the construction of new buildings that combined elements from multiple architectural traditions. The development of urban centres throughout Burgundian territories reflected the kingdom's growing administrative sophistication and economic prosperity, while demonstrating successful integration of different cultural approaches to urban planning and development. Cities like Lyon and Geneva experienced substantial growth during this period, with archaeological evidence revealing extensive construction projects that combined Roman urban planning principles with Germanic concepts of political and social organisation. The presence of both Arian and Catholic religious buildings within the same urban context demonstrates the successful accommodation of religious diversity within shared political frameworks. The daily life practices that emerged in Burgundian communities during the early 6th century reveal the intimate ways in which cultural synthesis affected ordinary people's experiences and identities. Archaeological evidence from residential sites reveals the adoption of Roman cooking techniques and dietary practices alongside the preservation of traditional Germanic food preferences and meal customs. The material remains suggest that households developed flexible approaches to daily life that could incorporate innovations from multiple cultural sources while maintaining essential elements of traditional identity and social organisation. The textile production and clothing styles that characterise Burgundian society during this period demonstrate similar patterns of cultural adaptation and synthesis. Archaeological analysis of textile remains and clothing accessories reveals the combination of Germanic weaving techniques with Roman decorative styles, creating distinctive Burgundian approaches to personal adornment and social display. The presence of both Germanic-style brooches and Roman-influenced belt fittings in the same archaeological contexts suggests that individuals could draw upon multiple cultural traditions in constructing their personal and social identities. The death of Gundobad in 516 AD marked the beginning of a succession crisis that would expose the fundamental structural weaknesses underlying Burgundian royal authority, setting in motion a series of dynastic conflicts that ultimately made the kingdom vulnerable to Frankish conquest. Sigismund's accession to the throne, while initially appearing to strengthen the kingdom through his Catholic conversion and diplomatic initiatives, actually created new sources of internal tension as traditional Burgundian nobles questioned the legitimacy of a ruler who had abandoned the Arian faith that had become closely associated with Germanic royal identity. The king's religious transformation, intended to align Burgundian interests with the broader Catholic European political environment, instead alienated crucial segments of his own aristocracy, while failing to secure the external support necessary to compensate for this domestic opposition. The most serious challenge to Sigismund's authority emerged from his own family, as his brother Godomar III maintained control over substantial territories around Geneva, while refusing to acknowledge the new king's supremacy or accept his religious policies. Godomar's position represented more than simple fraternal rivalry. It embodied a fundamental disagreement about the future direction of Burgundian political development, with the younger brother advocating for the preservation of traditional Germanic institutions and religious practices that had sustained Burgundian independence since their settlement in Sapaudia. Archaeological evidence from Geneva during this period reveals extensive fortification work and the accumulation of military supplies, suggesting systematic preparation for armed resistance against royal authority. The division of the kingdom between these competing brothers created parallel administrative systems that undermined the unified governance structures that Gundobad had carefully constructed during his long reign. Sigismund controlled the southern territories centred around Lyon and Vienne, where his Catholic conversion had found more acceptance among the substantial Gallo-Roman populations, while Godomar commanded the loyalty of northern regions where traditional Burgundian warrior culture remained strongest. This geographic division roughly corresponded to religious and cultural boundaries that had persisted despite decades of attempted integration, revealing the superficial nature of the cultural synthesis that had characterized the kingdom's apparent prosperity. The practical consequences of this dynastic split extended far beyond symbolic disputes over royal legitimacy to encompass fundamental questions about military organization, legal administration, and economic policy that affected every aspect of Burgundian society. Sigismund's territories operated under legal frameworks that emphasized Catholic ecclesiastical authority and Roman administrative procedures, while Godomar's domains maintained traditional Germanic legal systems and military organizations. The archaeological record reveals distinct material culture patterns emerging in different regions during this period, with northern territories showing continued emphasis on traditional Burgundian metalwork and burial practices, while southern areas increasingly adopted Roman and Catholic cultural elements. The military implications of this division proved particularly damaging to Burgundian defensive capabilities, as the kingdom's military strength had always depended upon the coordination of warrior bands led by nobles who owed personal loyalty to a unified royal authority. The competing claims of Sigismund and Godomar forced individual nobles to choose sides in ways that fractured traditional military alliances and created opportunities for external enemies to exploit Burgundian weakness. Contemporary sources describe numerous skirmishes between supporters of the rival brothers, conflicts that depleted military resources while providing valuable intelligence about Burgundian defensive weaknesses to neighbouring kingdoms. The Frankish rulers Childebert and Clotaire I recognised the strategic opportunities presented by Burgundian internal divisions, understanding that a divided kingdom could not effectively resist coordinated external pressure while its internal conflicts provided potential allies among disaffected Burgundian nobles. Their systematic preparation for conquest involved not merely military planning, but sophisticated intelligence gathering and diplomatic manoeuvring designed to maximise Burgundian internal divisions while minimising the risks of unified resistance. Archaeological evidence from Frankish territories reveals substantial military preparations during the early 520s, including the expansion of weapon production facilities and the construction of supply depots along routes leading towards Burgundian territories. The Frankish approach to Burgundian conquest demonstrated remarkable strategic sophistication, avoiding direct confrontation with unified Burgundian forces while exploiting every opportunity to weaken the kingdom through political manipulation and targeted military pressure. Rather than launching immediate full-scale invasions, the Frankish kings pursued a strategy of gradual territorial acquisition combined with diplomatic initiatives designed to isolate potential Burgundian allies and encourage defections among the kingdom's nobility. This approach reflected lessons learned from previous Frankish campaigns against other Germanic kingdoms, where hasty military action had often strengthened enemy resistance by creating shared external threats that could overcome internal divisions. The first phase of Frankish operations against the Burgundians began in 523 AD, with carefully coordinated raids against border territories that tested Burgundian defensive responses while avoiding commitments to major battles that might unite the divided kingdom against a common enemy. These initial attacks targeted isolated settlements and transportation routes, rather than major fortified positions, creating economic disruption and psychological pressure, while gathering intelligence about Burgundian military capabilities and defensive preparations. Archaeological evidence from the border regions reveals extensive damage to civilian settlements during this period, suggesting systematic campaigns designed to undermine economic foundations rather than achieve immediate territorial conquest. Childebertus's invasion of northern Burgundian territories proceeded through methodical siege operations that demonstrated Frankish mastery of Roman military engineering techniques while exploiting the defensive weaknesses created by Burgundian internal divisions. The Siege of Geneva in 524 AD exemplified this approach, with Frankish forces employing sophisticated siege equipment, including battering rams, siege towers, and catapults that overwhelmed defenders who had expected to face traditional Germanic assault tactics. Contemporary accounts describe the systematic destruction of Geneva's fortifications and the massacre of its garrison, events that demonstrated Frankish determination to eliminate Burgundian resistance through exemplary violence rather than negotiated settlement. The fall of Geneva sent shockwaves throughout Burgundian territories, as the city had been considered virtually impregnable due to its natural defensive position and substantial fortifications. Archaeological excavations at Geneva have revealed evidence of intense fighting within the city walls, with burned buildings, scattered weapons, and mass burial sites that testify to the ferocity of the final assault. The discovery of Frankish military equipment alongside Burgundian defensive materials suggests that the siege involved prolonged fighting before the city's eventual capitulation, indicating determined resistance despite the ultimate outcome. Godemar III's response to the loss of Geneva revealed both his military capabilities and the fundamental limitations that would ultimately doom Burgundian resistance to Frankish conquest. His attempts to organise counterattacks against Frankish positions demonstrated tactical competence and personal courage, but his forces lacked the numerical strength and logistical support necessary to sustain prolonged campaigns against better equipped enemies. Archaeological evidence from battlefield sites reveals that Burgundian forces continued to rely primarily on traditional Germanic weapons and tactics that proved inadequate against Frankish armies equipped with Roman siege equipment and organised according to more sophisticated military principles. The Siege of Lyon in 532 AD represented the climactic confrontation between Frankish expansion and Burgundian resistance, with both sides recognising that control of this strategically crucial city would determine the ultimate fate of the kingdom. Lyon's position at the confluence of the Rhône and Saône rivers made it the natural centre of southeastern Gallic trade networks, while its substantial fortifications and loyal garrison made it the strongest remaining Burgundian defensive position. Clotair's decision to conduct the siege personally demonstrated the importance he attached to capturing the city, while Sigismund's desperate attempts to organise relief forces revealed his understanding that Lyon's fall would effectively end Burgundian independence. The Frankish siege of Lyon employed the full range of military technologies and tactics that had proven successful in previous campaigns, with massive siege engines systematically destroying the city's defensive walls, while coordinated assaults prevented the garrison from conducting effective repairs or counterattacks. Archaeological evidence from Lyon reveals extensive destruction throughout the city during this period, with burned buildings, collapsed fortifications, and scattered military equipment that testify to the intensity of the fighting. The discovery of multiple mass burial sites suggests that both civilian and military casualties were substantial, indicating that the siege involved not merely military conquest, but systematic destruction of the city's ability to serve as a centre of continued resistance. The psychological impact of Lyon's fall extended far beyond its immediate military significance, to encompass the collapse of Burgundian morale and the political cohesion throughout the kingdom. Contemporary sources describe widespread panic among Burgundian nobles as news of the city's capture spread, with many choosing to abandon their territories and seek refuge in neighbouring kingdoms rather than continue hopeless resistance against Frankish forces. The archaeological record reveals evidence of hasty abandonment at numerous elite residential sites during this period, with valuable objects left behind and buildings showing signs of rapid evacuation rather than systematic demolition. The siege and capture of Vienne in 534 AD completed the systematic destruction of Burgundian defensive capabilities, eliminating the last major stronghold capable of serving as a centre for organised resistance against Frankish rule. Vienne's strategic position controlling access to the upper Rhone valley had made it a crucial component of Burgundian defensive planning, while its role as an ecclesiastical centre had given it symbolic importance that extended beyond purely military considerations. The city's fall marked not merely the end of Burgundian military resistance, but the collapse of the institutional frameworks that had sustained Burgundian political and cultural identity for over a century. The Frankish conquest of Vienne involved not only military operations but systematic efforts to eliminate the administrative and religious institutions that had supported Burgundian independence. Archaeological evidence reveals the deliberate destruction of royal administrative buildings and the confiscation of ecclesiastical properties that had served as centres of Burgundian cultural life. The discovery of damaged religious artefacts and scattered administrative documents suggests that Frankish forces pursued policies designed to prevent any future revival of Burgundian political organisation rather than simply achieving military victory. The integration of conquered Burgundian territories into the expanding Frankish Merovingian kingdom required complex administrative arrangements that could accommodate the diverse populations and established institutions of the former kingdom while ensuring effective Frankish control. The Merovingian approach to territorial integration had evolved through previous conquests to emphasise the preservation of existing administrative structures under new leadership rather than complete institutional replacement, recognising that successful governance required maintaining economic productivity and social stability in newly acquired territories. This pragmatic approach proved particularly important in Burgundian lands, where the sophisticated legal and administrative systems developed under Gundobad and his successors had created institutional capabilities that could serve Frankish interests if properly managed. The fate of the Burgundian nobility under Frankish rule varied significantly depending on individual circumstances and the specific terms under which different nobles had submitted to Merovingian authority. Those who had surrendered early in the conquest process or had actively supported Frankish operations often retained substantial portions of their properties and continued to exercise local authority under Frankish oversight, while nobles who had resisted to the end faced confiscation of their lands and exile from their ancestral territories. Archaeological evidence reveals both continuity and disruption in elite residential patterns, with some noble households maintaining their traditional lifestyle and material culture, while others show signs of rapid social and economic decline. The preservation of Burgundian legal traditions within the Frankish administrative system demonstrated the practical value of the sophisticated legal codes that had been developed during the kingdom's independent existence. The Lex Burgundionum continued to govern legal relationships among former Burgundian subjects, while Frankish law applied to interactions involving Frankish settlers and officials, creating complex jurisdictional arrangements that required careful management to prevent conflicts. The survival of substantial portions of Burgundian legal documentation in later Frankish archives suggests that Merovingian administrators recognised the utility of existing legal frameworks and sought to incorporate them into their expanding governmental systems, rather than simply replacing them with Frankish alternatives. The economic integration of former Burgundian territories proceeded through systematic efforts to maintain existing productive activities while redirecting their outputs to serve Frankish political and military needs. The sophisticated agricultural systems that had developed in Burgundian territories continued to operate under new ownership arrangements, with Frankish nobles and royal officials assuming control of major estates while preserving the technical expertise and labour forces that had made these properties productive. Archaeological evidence reveals continued operation of craft production facilities and commercial networks, suggesting that economic life adapted to new political circumstances without experiencing complete disruption. The religious transformation that accompanied Frankish conquest involved the systematic replacement of Arian ecclesiastical hierarchies with Catholic clergy loyal to Frankish political authority, completing the religious changes that had begun under Sigismund's rule, but extending them throughout all former Burgundian territories. The Merovingian commitment to Catholic orthodoxy made the elimination of Arian influences a political as well as religious priority, requiring careful management to avoid alienating populations that might retain loyalty to traditional religious authorities. Archaeological evidence from religious sites reveals both the destruction of Arian religious buildings and the rapid construction of new Catholic churches designed to serve the spiritual needs of mixed populations under unified religious authority. The cultural legacy of the Burgundian kingdom persisted despite political conquest through the preservation of distinctive artistic traditions, legal practices and social customs that had developed during the century of independent existence. The synthesis of Germanic and Roman cultural elements that had characterized Burgundian society provided models for similar cultural integration processes occurring throughout the Frankish kingdom as it absorbed diverse populations and territories. Archaeological evidence reveals the continued production of distinctively Burgundian artistic styles and craft products well into the Frankish period, suggesting that cultural identity could survive political transformation when it served practical functions or met continuing social needs. The administrative incorporation of former Burgundian territories into the Frankish realm proceeded through a systematic process that transformed the conquered kingdom into the Kingdom of Burgundy, a distinct administrative unit within the expanding Merovingian political structure. This transformation required careful balancing between the practical necessity of maintaining existing governmental frameworks and the political imperative of establishing clear Frankish authority over newly acquired populations. The Merovingian approach to territorial administration had evolved through decades of conquest and integration, developing sophisticated methods for incorporating diverse populations while preventing the emergence of separatist movements that could threaten royal authority. The establishment of the Kingdom of Burgundy as a formal administrative division reflected Frankish recognition that the former Burgundian territories possessed distinctive characteristics that required specialized governmental approaches. Unlike the relatively homogeneous Frankish heartlands along the Rhine and Seine valleys, the Burgundian regions encompassed diverse populations with complex legal traditions, established ecclesiastical hierarchies, and sophisticated economic systems that had developed during centuries of Roman rule, followed by Germanic kingdom administration. The creation of a separate kingdom acknowledged these realities while establishing clear hierarchical relationships that subordinated Burgundian administrative structures to overall Merovingian royal authority. The appointment of Frankish nobles to key administrative positions throughout the former Burgundian territories ensured political loyalty while creating opportunities for advancement that could attract ambitious individuals from throughout the Merovingian realm. These appointments typically involved experienced administrators who had demonstrated competence in managing complex territorial arrangements and diverse populations in other parts of the Frankish kingdom. Archaeological evidence from administrative centres reveals substantial construction projects during the early years of Frankish rule, including the expansion of royal residences, the construction of new administrative buildings, and the modification of existing structures to accommodate Frankish governmental procedures. The persistence of Burgundian legal traditions under Frankish overlordship demonstrated the practical value of the sophisticated legal codes that had been developed during the independent kingdom's existence. The Lex Burgundionum continued to govern legal relationships among former Burgundian subjects, while the Lex Romana Burgundianum remained in effect for interactions involving Roman populations within the territory. This legal continuity served Frankish administrative interests by maintaining established frameworks for dispute resolution and property regulation that would have been costly and disruptive to replace entirely. Contemporary legal documents reveal the continued application of Burgundian legal principles decades after the conquest. suggesting that Frankish administrators recognised the effectiveness of existing legal systems. The adaptation of Burgundian legal traditions to serve Frankish political needs involved subtle modifications that preserved essential procedural elements while ensuring ultimate royal authority over legal decisions. Frankish officials assumed supervisory roles over local courts that continued to operate according to Burgundian legal procedures, creating hierarchical arrangements that maintained familiar legal processes while establishing clear chains of command leading to Merovingian royal authority. Archaeological evidence from judicial centres reveals the construction of new courthouse facilities that combined traditional Burgundian architectural elements with Frankish administrative requirements, creating hybrid buildings that symbolically represented the synthesis of different governmental traditions. Local governance structures throughout the former Burgundian territories retained many of their traditional characteristics, while accepting new forms of oversight that ensured compliance with Frankish political objectives. The comital system that had developed during the independent kingdom continued to function, with local counts maintaining responsibility for territorial administration, military organisation, and judicial oversight within their jurisdictions. However, these positions increasingly went to individuals with demonstrated loyalty to Frankish royal authority, whether through previous service in other parts of the Merovingian realm or through marriage alliances that connected local noble families to Frankish political networks. The preservation of existing administrative boundaries and territorial divisions reflected Frankish understanding that established governmental frameworks possessed practical advantages that outweighed the symbolic benefits of complete institutional replacement. The Pagus system that had organised local administration throughout Burgundian territories continued to operate under Frankish rule, with individual pagi maintaining their traditional boundaries and administrative centres while accepting new forms of royal oversight. Archaeological surveys reveal continued occupation of traditional administrative sites during the Frankish period, with evidence of building modifications and expansions that suggest adaptation rather than replacement of existing governmental facilities. The integration of Burgundian administrative personnel into Frankish governmental systems proceeded through careful evaluation of individual qualifications and political reliability rather than wholesale replacement of existing officials. Many lower-level administrators who possessed essential technical expertise and local knowledge retained their positions under Frankish oversight, providing continuity that facilitated the transition to new political arrangements. Contemporary documents reveal the continued employment of scribes, legal experts, and financial administrators who had served the independent kingdom, suggesting that Frankish rulers recognized the practical value of preserving institutional memory and administrative expertise. The role of Burgundian nobles in Carolingian administration evolved gradually as political circumstances changed and new opportunities for advancement emerged within the expanding Frankish political system. Initially, former Burgundian nobles faced suspicion and careful monitoring as potentially unreliable subjects whose loyalty to new rulers remained questionable. However, those who demonstrated consistent support for Frankish policies and participated effectively in royal military campaigns gradually gained access to positions of greater responsibility and influence within the broader Merovingian governmental structure. The gradual integration of Burgundian aristocracy into Frankish noble society proceeded through multiple mechanisms that created bonds of mutual interest and shared identity between formerly separate elite groups. Marriage alliances between Burgundian and Frankish noble families provided the most direct path for integration, creating kinship relationships that transcended ethnic boundaries while establishing mutual obligations that reinforced political loyalty. Archaeological evidence from elite burial sites reveals the gradual adoption of Frankish material culture elements by Burgundian noble families, including distinctive jewellery styles, weapon types, and burial practices that reflected growing cultural synthesis between different aristocratic traditions. Military service provided another crucial avenue for Burgundian noble integration into Frankish political structures, as participation in royal military campaigns offered opportunities to demonstrate loyalty while acquiring the plunder and prestige that remained central to Germanic noble culture. Burgundian warriors who distinguished themselves in Frankish military operations could expect rewards including land grants, official positions, and access to royal court circles that had previously been restricted to ethnic Franks. The archaeological record reveals evidence of Burgundian nobles receiving substantial property grants in various parts of the Merovingian realm, indicating successful integration into broader Frankish territorial distribution systems. The preservation of traditional Burgundian noble privileges under Frankish rule required careful negotiation between different concepts of aristocratic authority and social hierarchy. Frankish political theory emphasized the king's ultimate authority over all aspects of noble status and privilege, while Burgundian traditions had recognized certain hereditary rights and customary obligations that operated independently of royal approval. The resolution of these conflicting approaches involved the development of hybrid systems that preserved essential elements of Burgundian noble identity, while establishing clear subordination to Frankish royal authority. The participation of Burgundian nobles in Frankish court life created opportunities for cultural exchange and political advancement that gradually eroded the distinctions between different ethnic aristocratic groups. The Merovingian royal court attracted ambitious nobles from throughout the kingdom, creating environments where Burgundian, Frankish, and other Germanic noble traditions interacted and influenced each other. Contemporary sources describe Burgundian nobles participating in court ceremonies, royal councils, and diplomatic missions that required familiarity with Frankish political customs, while providing opportunities to influence royal policy decisions. The economic foundations of Burgundian noble power adapted to Frankish political arrangements while maintaining many traditional characteristics that had sustained aristocratic authority during the independent kingdom. Large estates that had formed the basis of noble wealth continued to operate under new ownership arrangements, with former Burgundian nobles often retaining substantial portions of their properties while accepting Frankish oversight of their economic activities. Archaeological evidence from noble residential sites reveals continued investment in agricultural improvements, craft production facilities, and commercial activities that maintained the economic foundations necessary for our aristocratic lifestyle and political influence. Economic continuity throughout the former Burgundian territories reflected both the practical necessity of maintaining productive activities and the sophisticated commercial networks that had developed during the independent kingdom's existence. The Rhone Valley trade routes that had connected Mediterranean markets with northern European commercial centres continued to operate under Frankish administration, providing revenues through customs duties and commercial taxes that served royal financial needs while maintaining the economic foundations of regional prosperity. Archaeological evidence from commercial centres reveals continued activity at traditional market sites, with material remains indicating the persistence of established trading relationships despite political changes. The development of trade networks under Frankish rule built upon existing commercial relationships while expanding access to markets throughout the growing Merovingian realm. Burgundian merchants who had previously focused primarily on Mediterranean connections gained opportunities to participate in commercial activities extending into northern Gaul, the Rhine Valley, and beyond into Germanic territories that had come under Frankish influence. The archaeological record reveals increasing diversity in traded goods found at Burgundian sites during the Frankish period, including products from Scandinavia, the British Isles, and Eastern European regions that had previously been accessible only through complex intermediary arrangements. The integration of Burgundian commercial activities into broader Frankish economic systems required adaptation of existing business practices to accommodate different legal frameworks and administrative requirements. Frankish commercial law differed in significant ways from the legal traditions that had governed trade during the independent kingdom, requiring merchants and craftsmen to learn new procedures for contract negotiation, dispute resolution, and tax payment. Contemporary documents reveal the gradual adoption of Frankish commercial practices alongside the preservation of traditional Burgundian business relationships, creating hybrid economic systems that combined elements from multiple legal and cultural traditions. Agricultural production throughout the former Burgundian territories maintained many traditional characteristics, while adapting to new ownership patterns and administrative requirements imposed by Frankish rule. The villa system that had formed the backbone of rural economic organisation continued to operate under new management arrangements, with Frankish nobles and royal officials assuming control of major agricultural estates while preserving the technical expertise and labour systems that had made these properties productive. Archaeological evidence from rural sites reveals continued investment in agricultural infrastructure, including the construction of new storage facilities, the expansion of irrigation systems, and the introduction of improved farming techniques that increased productivity. The preservation of specialised craft production capabilities reflected Frankish recognition of the economic value represented by skilled artisans and established manufacturing centres throughout the former Burgundian territories. Metalworking facilities that had produced the distinctive weapons and jewellery characteristic of Burgundian material culture continue to operate under new ownership arrangements, often expanding their production to serve markets throughout the Frankish realm. Archaeological evidence from craft production sites reveals both continuity in traditional techniques and innovation in response to new market demands, with artisans developing hybrid styles that combined Burgundian artistic traditions with Frankish cultural preferences. The wine production that had become increasingly important to the Burgundian economy during the independent kingdom continued to develop under Frankish administration, benefiting from expanded market access and royal patronage that recognised the commercial and diplomatic value of high-quality wine production. The favourable climatic conditions and established vineyard infrastructure in regions like the Côte d'Or provided natural advantages that Frankish administrators sought to exploit for both economic and political purposes. Archaeological evidence from wine-producing regions reveals substantial investments in production facilities during the early Frankish period, including the construction of new pressing facilities, storage buildings, and transportation infrastructure that supported expanded commercial operations. The monetary systems that had developed during the independent Burgundian kingdom required adaptation to accommodate Frankish royal authority over coinage and currency regulation. The Merovingian approach to monetary policy emphasised royal control over precious metal supplies and minting operations, while allowing regional variations that could serve local economic needs. Numismatic evidence reveals the gradual replacement of distinctively Burgundian coin designs with Frankish royal imagery, though local minting operations continued to serve regional commercial requirements under royal oversight. The transportation infrastructure that had supported commercial activities during the independent kingdom received continued investment under Frankish administration, recognising that effective trade networks required systematic maintenance of roads, bridges and river navigation facilities. The strategic importance of the Rhone Valley transportation corridor made infrastructure maintenance a royal priority that served both economic and military objectives. Archaeological evidence reveals substantial construction projects during the early Frankish period, including bridge reconstruction, road improvements, and the construction of new port facilities that enhanced the region's commercial capabilities. The transformation of Burgundian territories under Carolingian rule represented a fundamental shift from the administrative pragmatism of Merovingian governance to a more ambitious vision of cultural renewal and imperial restoration that would profoundly reshape regional identity throughout the 8th and 9th centuries. when Pepin the Short consolidated Frankish royal authority in 751 AD, the former Burgundian lands had already experienced 2 centuries of integration into Frankish political structures, creating hybrid governmental systems that combined Germanic administrative traditions with Roman provincial practices. The Carolingian revolution in governance extended far beyond mere dynastic change to encompass systematic efforts at cultural standardization, religious reform, and intellectual revival that would fundamentally alter the relationship between regional identities and imperial authority. The Carolingian approach to territorial administration emphasized standardization and centralization, while recognizing that effective governance required accommodation of established regional characteristics and traditions. Throughout the former Burgundian territories, this approach manifested itself through the systematic appointment of counts and other royal officials who possessed both technical competence and demonstrated loyalty to Carolingian political objectives. These appointments typically involved individuals with extensive experience in imperial administration, often drawn from other parts of the Carolingian realm where they had proven their ability to manage complex territorial arrangements and diverse populations effectively. Archaeological evidence from administrative centres throughout Burgundy reveals substantial construction projects during the early Carolingian period, including the expansion of royal palaces, the construction of new administrative complexes, and the modification of existing buildings to accommodate the expanded bureaucratic requirements of Carolingian governance. The palace complex at Chalon-sur-Saône, for example, underwent major renovations during the reign of Charlemagne that created specialised facilities for different aspects of royal administration, including separate buildings for judicial proceedings, financial management, and diplomatic activities. These architectural modifications reflected the Carolingian emphasis on systematic administration and the growing complexity of imperial governmental operations. The preservation of Burgundian regional identity within these new imperial structures required careful negotiation between centralizing tendencies and local traditions that had developed during centuries of distinct political evolution. Carolingian administrators recognized that successful governance depended upon maintaining the loyalty and cooperation of established regional elites while ensuring effective implementation of imperial policies and objectives. This balance was achieved through institutional arrangements that preserved many traditional aspects of Burgundian legal and administrative practices, while establishing clear hierarchical relationships that subordinated regional authority to imperial oversight. The comital system that governed local administration throughout Burgundian territories underwent significant evolution under Carolingian rule, with traditional county boundaries often preserved, while the selection and authority of individual counts became subject to direct royal control. The Carolingian emphasis on written documentation and systematic record-keeping created new requirements for local administrators who needed to maintain detailed accounts of their activities and regularly report to royal officials responsible for territorial oversight. Archaeological excavations at county administrative centres have uncovered substantial archives of administrative documents from this period, including tax records, judicial proceedings, and correspondence with royal officials that demonstrate the systematic nature of Carolingian governmental operations. The integration of Burgundian legal traditions into the broader Carolingian legal system proceeded through careful preservation of established procedures while ensuring compliance with imperial standards of justice and administrative efficiency. The capitulary system, developed by Carolingian administrators, provided frameworks for adapting local legal practices to serve imperial objectives, while maintaining familiar procedures that could ensure continued acceptance by regional populations. Contemporary legal documents reveal the continued application of modified versions of Burgundian legal codes decades after the establishment of Carolingian rule, suggesting that imperial administrators recognized the practical value of preserving effective local legal traditions. The monastic reform movements that characterize Carolingian religious policy found particularly fertile ground in Burgundian territories, where established monastic communities possessed both the institutional infrastructure and intellectual traditions necessary for supporting ambitious programs of religious and cultural renewal. The Abbey of Saint-Maurice, which had been founded during the independent Burgundian kingdom, became a focal point for Carolingian monastic reform efforts, receiving substantial royal patronage and serving as a model for similar reforms throughout the region. Archaeological evidence from the abbey reveals extensive construction projects during the early Carolingian period, including the expansion of church buildings, the construction of new residential quarters for monks, and the creation of specialised facilities for manuscript production and scholarly activities. The Benedictine reform movement found particularly strong support among Carolingian administrators, who recognised that standardised monastic practices could serve both religious and political objectives by creating networks of loyal religious institutions throughout the empire. The Abbey of Cluny, founded in 910 AD through the patronage of Duke William IV of Aquitaine, emerged as the most influential centre of monastic reform in Burgundian territories, developing innovative approaches to monastic organisation that would influence religious communities throughout Europe. The Cluniac reforms emphasised strict adherence to the rule of St. Benedict, while creating centralised administrative structures that connected individual monasteries to broader networks of religious authority and mutual support. The scriptoriums that developed at Cluniac monasteries throughout Burgundy became renowned throughout Europe for the quality and sophistication of their manuscript production, creating illuminated texts that combined traditional Burgundian artistic elements with Carolingian stylistic innovations. Archaeological evidence from monastic scriptoriums reveals the presence of specialised workshops equipped with the tools and materials necessary for producing high-quality manuscripts, including parchment preparation facilities, ink production areas, and binding workshops that could create finished books capable of surviving centuries of use. The manuscripts produced at these facilities demonstrate remarkable artistic sophistication, with illuminations that incorporate complex geometric patterns derived from Germanic artistic traditions, alongside figurative elements influenced by Byzantine and Italian artistic styles. The intellectual life that flourished in Burgundian monasteries during the Carolingian period contributed significantly to the broader cultural renaissance that characterised this era of European history. Monastic libraries accumulated substantial collections of classical texts, patristic writings, and contemporary scholarly works that provided the foundation for advanced educational programs that attracted students from throughout the Carolingian realm. The presence of scholars from various cultural backgrounds, including former Roman territories, Germanic regions, and even Byzantine and Islamic areas, created cosmopolitan intellectual environments that fostered innovation and cultural synthesis. The educational programs developed at Burgundian monasteries emphasized both traditional religious instruction and the liberal arts curriculum that had been preserved from classical antiquity, creating educational frameworks that could prepare students for both ecclesiastical careers and secular administrative positions. Archaeological evidence from monastic educational facilities reveals the presence of specialised classrooms, libraries and workshops where students could receive instruction in grammar, rhetoric, dialectic, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy and music. The curriculum materials preserved in monastic archives demonstrate the sophisticated educational standards maintained at these institutions, with textbooks and instructional materials that required advanced literacy and mathematical skills. The development of distinctive Burgundian approaches to manuscript illumination during the Carolingian period reflected the synthesis of multiple artistic traditions within institutional frameworks that could support sustained artistic innovation. The illuminated manuscripts produced at Burgundian scriptoriums demonstrate remarkable technical sophistication, with complex colour palettes, intricate decorative schemes, and innovative approaches to integrating text and image that influenced manuscript production throughout Europe. The artistic styles that emerged from these workshops combined traditional Germanic geometric patterns with classical Roman figurative elements and contemporary Carolingian stylistic innovations, creating distinctive visual languages that expressed both regional identity and imperial cultural ideals. The Abbey of Citeaux, founded in 1098 AD as part of the broader Cistercian reform movement, represented a different approach to monastic organisation that emphasised simplicity, manual labour, and direct engagement with agricultural and craft production activities. The Cistercian emphasis on self-sufficiency and economic productivity created monastic communities that made substantial contributions to regional economic development while maintaining rigorous standards of religious observance and intellectual activity. Archaeological evidence from Cistercian monasteries reveals extensive agricultural facilities, including granges, mills, and workshops that supported both monastic communities and surrounding populations through their economic activities. The architectural innovations developed by Cistercian monasteries throughout Burgundy influenced church construction throughout Europe, creating distinctive building styles that combined functional efficiency with spiritual symbolism in ways that expressed both religious devotion and technological sophistication. The Cistercian emphasis on simplicity and geometric harmony produced church designs that eliminated unnecessary decorative elements while creating interior spaces that enhanced liturgical activities and communal worship. Archaeological analysis of Cistercian church foundations reveals sophisticated understanding of structural engineering principles that enable the construction of large interior spaces without the massive wall supports required by earlier Romanesque architectural styles. The agricultural innovations developed by Cistercian monasteries contributed significantly to the economic prosperity that characterized Burgundian territories during the high medieval period, with monastic estates serving as centres for the development and dissemination of improved farming techniques, new crop varieties, and more efficient land management practices. The Cistercian emphasis on manual labour and direct engagement with agricultural activities created monastic communities that possessed practical expertise in farming, animal husbandry, and land management that benefited both their own communities and surrounding secular populations. Archaeological evidence from Cistercian agricultural facilities reveals sophisticated approaches to crop rotation, soil management, and agricultural planning that increased productivity while maintaining long-term environmental sustainability. The Treaty of Verdun in 843 AD created new political realities that would fundamentally reshape the relationship between Burgundian regional identity and imperial authority, dividing the former Carolingian Empire into separate kingdoms that competed for territorial control and political influence throughout the region. The treaty's provisions assigned different portions of Burgundian territory to Middle Francia under Lothair and West Francia under Charles the Bald, creating political boundaries that cut across established administrative divisions and cultural regions in ways that would generate centuries of territorial disputes and conflicting loyalties. The division of Burgundian territories between different Carolingian kingdoms created complex political situations that required careful navigation by regional elites who found themselves subject to competing claims of royal authority and conflicting sets of political obligations. The counts and other nobles who governed local territories needed to balance their traditional relationships with established regional institutions against new requirements for loyalty to different Carolingian rulers whose territorial claims might conflict with each other. Contemporary documents reveal the diplomatic complexity of these arrangements, with individual nobles sometimes maintaining simultaneous relationships with multiple Carolingian courts while attempting to preserve their own territorial authority and regional influence. The portion of Burgundy assigned to Middle Francia under the Treaty of Verdun included strategically important territories along the Rhone Valley and the Saône River system, creating political arrangements that recognise the economic and cultural coherence of these regions, while establishing new forms of royal authority over their administration. Lothair's approach to governing these territories emphasised the preservation of established administrative structures while ensuring effective implementation of royal policies and objectives. Archaeological evidence from administrative centres in Middle Francia reveals continued investment in governmental infrastructure, including the expansion of royal residences, the construction of new administrative buildings, and the modification of existing facilities to accommodate the requirements of the new political arrangements. The territories assigned to West Francia included important agricultural regions and commercial centres that had formed crucial components of the regional economy during previous periods of unified administration. Charles the Bald's policies toward these territories reflected his broader strategy of maintaining effective control over diverse populations, while building the military and economic resources necessary for competing with his brothers for territorial expansion and political influence. The archaeological record reveals substantial military construction projects in West Frankish Burgundian territories during this period, including the construction of new fortifications, the expansion of existing defensive positions, and the establishment of garrison facilities that could support royal military operations. The cultural achievements that emerged from this politically fragmented environment demonstrated the resilience of regional identity and the continued vitality of intellectual and artistic traditions that had developed during previous periods of unified administration. The competitive political environment created by the division of the Carolingian Empire actually stimulated cultural innovation, as different rulers sought to attract talented individuals and demonstrate their legitimacy through patronage of artistic and intellectual activities. Burgundian monasteries and secular courts became centres of cultural production that served both regional identity and broader European intellectual development. The development of Romanesque architectural styles throughout Burgundian territories during the 10th and 11th centuries represented one of the most significant cultural achievements of this period, creating distinctive building traditions that influenced church construction throughout Europe while expressing specifically Burgundian approaches to combining spiritual symbolism with architectural innovation. The Romanesque churches constructed throughout the region demonstrate remarkable diversity in their specific design solutions, while maintaining common characteristics that reflect shared cultural values and technical traditions. Archaeological analysis of these buildings reveals sophisticated understanding of structural engineering principles that enable the construction of larger interior spaces, more complex decorative programs, and more ambitious architectural compositions than had been possible with earlier building techniques. The Church of St. Foy at Conques exemplifies the artistic sophistication achieved by Burgundian architects and craftsmen during the Romanesque period, with its elaborate sculptural program, complex architectural composition, and innovative approaches to integrating structural and decorative elements. The church's famous tympanum depicting the Last Judgment demonstrates remarkable artistic achievement, combining theological sophistication with visual drama in ways that could communicate complex religious concepts to both literate and illiterate audiences. Archaeological investigation of the church's construction history reveals the systematic planning and substantial resources required for such ambitious architectural projects, with evidence of specialised workshops, imported materials, and coordinated construction campaigns that extended over multiple decades. The sculptural programs developed for Romanesque churches throughout Burgundy created distinctive artistic languages that combined biblical narrative, theological symbolism, and regional cultural elements in ways that expressed both universal Christian themes and specifically Burgundian cultural identity. The carved capitals, doorway sculptures, and architectural decoration found in these churches demonstrate remarkable artistic sophistication, with complex iconographic programs that required extensive theological knowledge and sophisticated artistic skills to execute effectively. the presence of distinctive regional stylistic characteristics alongside broader European Romanesque elements suggests that Burgundian artists maintained strong connections to international artistic developments while developing their own approaches to religious art and architectural decoration. The emergence of the Duchy of Burgundy as a distinct political entity within the Capetian realm represented a fundamental transformation in the governance of the former Burgundian territories, creating institutional frameworks that would shape regional development for centuries while establishing new relationships between royal authority and territorial autonomy. When Hugh Capet ascended to the French throne in 987 AD, the fragmented political landscape left by Carolingian decline required systematic reconstruction of administrative structures capable of managing diverse territories with complex histories and established traditions of local governance. The creation of the Duchy of Burgundy under Capetian authority proceeded through careful negotiation between royal prerogatives and regional autonomy, establishing precedents that would influence French territorial administration throughout the medieval period. The appointment of Robert III as the first Capetian Duke of Burgundy in 1032 marked the beginning of a new era in regional governance that combined traditional French ducal authority with recognition of Burgundy's distinctive cultural and economic characteristics. Robert's position required balancing loyalty to Capetian royal authority with effective management of territories that possessed their own legal traditions, ecclesiastical hierarchies, and economic systems developed during centuries of independent or semi-independent existence. Archaeological evidence from ducal administrative centres reveals substantial construction projects during Robert's reign, including the expansion of ducal palaces, the establishment of new administrative facilities, and the modification of existing structures to accommodate the complex requirements of territorial governance within the Capetian political system. The simultaneous existence of the County of Burgundy, known as Franche-Comté, as a separate political entity within the Holy Roman Empire, created complex diplomatic and territorial relationships that would influence regional development throughout the medieval period. The county's position as an imperial fief under Germanic authority, while maintaining close cultural and economic ties with the French duchy, required sophisticated diplomatic management and created opportunities for both cooperation and conflict between different political systems. The territorial boundaries between duchy and county often reflected historical accident rather than natural geographic divisions, creating situations where related populations found themselves subject to different legal systems and political authorities. The administrative structures that developed within the Duchy of Burgundy during the early Capetian period preserved many traditional elements of regional governance, while adapting to new requirements imposed by integration into the French royal system. The ducal court that emerged at Dijon combined traditional Burgundian administrative practices with innovations borrowed from other parts of the Capetian realm, creating hybrid governmental systems that could address local needs while maintaining effective coordination with royal authority. Contemporary documents reveal the development of specialized administrative offices responsible for different aspects of territorial governance, including financial management, judicial oversight, military organization, and diplomatic relations with neighboring territories. The preservation of distinctive Burgundian legal traditions within the ducal administrative system reflected both practical necessity and political calculation, as effective governance required maintaining established frameworks for dispute resolution and property regulation that commanded acceptance among diverse regional populations. The coutume de Bourgogne that developed during this period incorporated traditional Burgundian legal principles alongside innovations derived from French royal law and canonical legal traditions, creating comprehensive legal codes that could address the complex disputes arising in territories with mixed populations and diverse economic activities. Archaeological evidence from judicial centres reveals the construction of specialized courthouse facilities equipped for conducting legal proceedings according to these hybrid legal systems, with architectural features that combine traditional Burgundian design elements with French royal symbolic requirements. The economic foundations of ducal authority rested upon systematic exploitation of the region's agricultural productivity and commercial advantages, with ducal administrators developing sophisticated approaches to taxation, trade regulation, and resource management that could support both territorial governance and obligations to Capetian royal authority. The fertile agricultural lands of the Côte d'Or and surrounding regions provided substantial revenues through agricultural taxes and feudal obligations, while control over strategic transportation routes enabled the collection of customs duties and commercial taxes that contributed significantly to ducal finances. Archaeological surveys of ducal estates reveal evidence of systematic agricultural improvement projects, including the construction of new mills, the expansion of vineyard cultivation, and the development of improved storage and transportation facilities that enhance both productivity and tax collection efficiency. The rise of the Valois Dukes of Burgundy, beginning with Philip the Bold's succession in 1363, transformed the duchy from a regional French territory into one of Europe's most powerful political entities, capable of challenging royal authority and pursuing independent diplomatic initiatives that reflected broader ambitions for territorial expansion and political influence. Philip's marriage to Margaret of Flanders in 1369 brought substantial Flemish territories under Burgundian control, creating a trans-regional state that combined the agricultural wealth of Burgundy with the commercial prosperity of the Low Countries. This territorial expansion required fundamental restructuring of administrative systems to accommodate diverse populations with different legal traditions, economic structures, and political expectations while maintaining unified governance under ducal authority. The administrative challenges posed by governing territories scattered across multiple kingdoms and imperial jurisdictions required innovative approaches to governmental organisation that could maintain effective coordination despite geographic separation and diverse legal frameworks. Philip the Bold's administration developed sophisticated communication networks that connected ducal territories through regular courier services, standardized administrative procedures, and coordinated policy implementation that ensured consistent governance despite territorial fragmentation. Archaeological evidence from administrative centres throughout the Burgundian territories reveals the construction of specialised facilities for document storage, courier services, and administrative coordination that supported these complex governmental operations. The military implications of Burgundian territorial expansion necessitated fundamental changes in defensive planning and military organisation, as the duchy's scattered territories required coordinated, defensive strategies that could protect widely separated populations while maintaining offensive capabilities sufficient for continued expansion. The construction of fortified positions at strategic locations throughout Burgundian territories proceeded according to systematic defensive planning that integrated individual fortifications into broader strategic frameworks. Archaeological analysis of Burgundian fortifications reveals sophisticated understanding of military engineering principles, with defensive systems that incorporated innovations in artillery design, siege warfare techniques, and coordinated military operations that reflected the evolving nature of late medieval warfare. John the Fearless's succession to the ducal title in 1404 marked a new phase of Burgundian expansion, characterised by more aggressive territorial acquisition and increasingly direct challenges to French royal authority. John's policies reflected his understanding that Burgundian survival required either complete independence from French overlordship or sufficient territorial expansion to make ducal authority effectively autonomous within the French political system. The assassination of Louis of Orléans in 1407, orchestrated by John's agents, demonstrated the Duke's willingness to employ violence against potential rivals while revealing the fundamental tensions between ducal ambitions and royal authority that would characterise Franco-Burgundian relationships throughout the 15th century. The civil war that erupted between Armagnac and Burgundian factions following Louis of Orleans' assassination created opportunities for territorial expansion while demonstrating the military capabilities that John the Fearless had developed through systematic investment in military technology and professional military organisations. Burgundian forces employed innovative military tactics that combined traditional heavy cavalry with new infantry formations equipped with crossbows, pikes, and early firearms that proved effective against both French royal armies and English invasion forces. Archaeological evidence from battlefield sites reveals the sophisticated military equipment employed by Burgundian forces, including specialised armour designs, improved weapon technologies, and coordinated logistics systems that supported sustained military campaigns across multiple theatres of operation. The expansion of Burgundian influence into the Low Countries proceeded through systematic acquisition of territories that possessed both strategic value and economic resources necessary for supporting ducal ambitions for greater political independence. The acquisition of Holland, Zeeland and Hainault through inheritance and purchase created territorial holdings that provided access to North Sea trade networks while establishing Burgundian control over some of Europe's most prosperous commercial centres. The integration of these territories required careful accommodation of established urban privileges, commercial practices, and legal traditions that had developed during centuries of relative autonomy under various overlords. Philip the Good's accession in 1419 initiated the most successful period of Burgundian expansion and cultural development, as the new duke combined military capabilities inherited from his predecessors with diplomatic skills that enabled systematic territorial acquisition without provoking unified opposition from neighbouring powers. Philip's approach to territorial expansion emphasised negotiation and legal acquisition over military conquest, recognising that sustainable expansion required maintaining the loyalty and cooperation of acquired populations, while avoiding conflicts that could drain ducal resources or provoke intervention by more powerful neighbours. The acquisition of additional Low Countries territories under Philip the Good proceeded through complex negotiations that balanced ducal expansion objectives with the practical requirements of governing diverse urban populations with established commercial privileges and political traditions. The purchase of Namur in 1421 and the acquisition of Luxembourg in 1443 extended Burgundian control over strategic territories that connected the duchy's scattered holdings, while providing access to important commercial routes and natural resources. Archaeological evidence from these newly acquired territories reveals substantial investment in administrative infrastructure, including the construction of new ducal residences, the expansion of existing governmental facilities, and the establishment of coordinated administrative systems that could integrate diverse territories under unified ducal authority. The development of Burgundian court culture during Philip the Good's reign created one of Europe's most sophisticated centres of late medieval artistic and intellectual activity, attracting talented individuals from throughout the continent, while establishing cultural standards that influenced aristocratic behaviour and artistic production across multiple kingdoms. The ducal court that developed at Brussels combined traditional Burgundian cultural elements with innovations borrowed from French, Flemish and Italian sources, creating distinctive approaches to courtly ceremony, artistic patronage, and intellectual discourse that expressed both ducal power and cultural sophistication. The establishment of the Order of the Golden Fleece in 1430 represented Philip the Good's most ambitious attempt to create institutional frameworks that could bind the Burgundian nobility to ducal authority while establishing the duchy's cultural and political prestige on a European scale. The order's elaborate ceremonial requirements, exclusive membership criteria, and complex symbolic systems created bonds of loyalty and mutual obligation among Burgundian nobles, while demonstrating ducal authority through spectacular public ceremonies that impressed both subjects and foreign observers. Archaeological evidence from sites associated with Golden Fleece ceremonies reveals the substantial resources invested in these events, including specialized ceremonial equipment, elaborate architectural settings, and coordinated logistics that supported gatherings of nobles from throughout the Burgundian territories. The cultural patronage that characterized Philip the Good's court attracted some of Europe's most talented artists, musicians, and scholars, creating intellectual environments that fostered innovation while serving ducal political objectives through the production of works that celebrated Burgundian achievements and legitimized ducal authority. The illuminated manuscripts produced at the ducal court combined technical sophistication with artistic innovation, creating visual narratives that communicated complex political and cultural messages to both literate and illiterate audiences. The Trésoriches Sieur du Duc de Berry and similar works demonstrate the remarkable artistic achievements possible when talented artists received generous patronage and access to the finest materials and technical resources. The musical innovations that emerged from Burgundian court patronage contributed significantly to the development of polyphonic composition and performance practices that would influence European musical development for centuries. Composers like Guillaume Dufay and Gilles Binchois developed new approaches to harmonic structure, melodic development, and vocal arrangement that created distinctively Burgundian musical styles, while incorporating influences from French, Italian, and Flemish musical traditions. Archaeological evidence from court musical facilities reveals the presence of specialized performance spaces, instrument workshops, and music libraries that supported sophisticated musical activities requiring substantial technical expertise and material resources. The territorial expansion that continued under Philip the Good's successors brought Burgundian control over an increasingly diverse collection of territories that stretched from the Alps to the North Sea, creating administrative challenges that required constant innovation in governmental organisation and diplomatic management. The acquisition of additional territories through inheritance, purchase, and military conquest created a patchwork state that lacked natural geographic unity, while possessing substantial economic resources and strategic advantages that could support ambitious political objectives if properly coordinated. Charles the Bold's accession to ducal authority in 1467 marked the beginning of the final phase of Burgundian expansion, characterized by increasingly aggressive territorial acquisition and direct challenges to both French royal authority and Holy Roman imperial power. Charles's military campaigns against Swiss confederations, Alsatian cities, and French royal forces demonstrated both the military capabilities that Burgundian expansion had created and the fundamental limitations that would ultimately doom ducal ambitions for complete political independence. His siege of Nancy in 1477 and subsequent death in battle mark the end of Burgundian expansion, while revealing the military and diplomatic challenges that had made continued expansion increasingly difficult to sustain. The death of Charles the Bold at Nancy in January 1477 precipitated a succession crisis that would fundamentally reshape European political geography, while establishing the foundation for centuries of Habsburg dominance over the former Burgundian territories. Charles's only heir, his daughter Mary of Burgundy, inherited vast territories that stretched from the Alps to the North Sea, but her position as a female ruler in a political environment dominated by aggressive male competitors created immediate vulnerabilities that neighbouring powers sought to exploit. The French crown under Louis the Pharaoh moved swiftly to reclaim territories that had been lost to Burgundian expansion, while the Holy Roman Empire under Frederick III pursued diplomatic strategies designed to bring Burgundian inheritance under Habsburg control through marriage alliance, rather than military conquest. Mary's marriage to Maximilian of Habsburg in August 1477 represented a calculated political decision that would have profound consequences for European development over the following centuries. The union brought the accumulated wealth and territorial holdings of the Burgundian state under Habsburg authority while providing Mary with military and diplomatic resources necessary for defending her inheritance against French aggression. Archaeological evidence from the wedding celebrations at Ghent reveals the spectacular nature of these ceremonies, with elaborate tournaments, feasting halls, and ceremonial displays that demonstrated both the wealth of the Burgundian inheritance and the political significance of the Habsburg alliance. Contemporary accounts describe processions involving hundreds of nobles, elaborate gift exchanges that included precious metalwork and illuminated manuscripts, and architectural decorations that transformed entire city districts into settings for dynastic celebration. The integration of Burgundian territories into the expanding Habsburg dominions required sophisticated administrative arrangements that could accommodate the diverse legal traditions, commercial privileges, and cultural expectations that had developed during centuries of Burgundian rule. Maximilian's approach to territorial governance emphasized the preservation of established local institutions while establishing clear hierarchical relationships that subordinated regional authority to Habsburg imperial objectives. The administrative structures that emerged from this integration process combined traditional Burgundian governmental practices with Habsburg innovations in territorial management, creating hybrid systems that would influence European administrative development throughout the early modern period. The preservation of Burgundian legal codes within Habsburg administrative frameworks demonstrated the practical value of the sophisticated legal systems that had been developed during the independent duchy's existence. The Coutume de Bourgogne continued to govern legal relationships throughout many former Burgundian territories, while specialized commercial courts maintained jurisdiction over trade disputes and commercial regulations that had been crucial to regional economic prosperity. Archaeological evidence from judicial centres reveals the construction of new courthouse facilities that combined traditional Burgundian architectural elements with Habsburg imperial symbolism, creating buildings that expressed both legal continuity and political transformation. The economic implications of Habsburg inheritance extended far beyond simple territorial acquisition to encompass fundamental restructuring of European commercial networks and financial systems. The combination of Burgundian agricultural wealth, Flemish commercial expertise, and Habsburg territorial resources created economic capabilities that would enable the financing of global expansion projects and military campaigns on an unprecedented scale. The silver mines of the Tyrol, combined with the commercial networks of Antwerp and Bruges, provided financial foundations that would support Habsburg operations in Italy, the Americas, and throughout the Holy Roman Empire for centuries. The linguistic legacy of Burgundian settlement and cultural development manifested itself through the preservation and evolution of Franco-Provençal dialects that had emerged from the interaction between Germanic Burgundian speech patterns and the Latin-derived languages spoken by Gallo-Roman populations. These linguistic developments reflected centuries of cultural synthesis that had created distinctive regional speech patterns combining elements from multiple language families. Modern linguistic analysis reveals that Franco-Provençal dialects preserved certain Germanic phonological features and vocabulary items that disappeared from other Romance languages, while simultaneously developing unique grammatical structures that reflected the specific cultural and social conditions of Burgundian territories. The development of Franco-Provençal as a distinct linguistic group proceeded through complex processes of language contact and cultural synthesis that occurred over several centuries of coexistence between Germanic and Romance-speaking populations. Archaeological evidence from settlement sites reveals patterns of cultural interaction that created conditions favourable for linguistic innovation and synthesis. Multilingual inscriptions found at religious sites demonstrate the practical use of multiple languages within the same communities, while the preservation of Germanic personal names within Romance linguistic contexts suggests sustained cultural contact rather than simple linguistic replacement. Regional variations within Franco-Provençal dialects reflect the diverse historical experiences of different Burgundian territories and the varying degrees of Germanic influence that characterize different areas during the settlement and integration periods. The dialect spoken in areas of concentrated Burgundian settlement preserved more Germanic vocabulary and phonological features than those that developed in regions with smaller Germanic populations or later settlement dates. Modern dialectological research has identified specific linguistic features that can be traced to Germanic substrates, including certain vowel systems, consonant clusters, and syntactic patterns that distinguish Franco-Provençal from other Romance languages. The influence of Burgundian linguistic development extended beyond the immediate territories of settlement to affect the evolution of French and other Romance languages through contact and borrowing relationships that operated over centuries of political and cultural interaction. Certain vocabulary items related to military organisation, legal procedures, and craft production that entered French during the medieval period can be traced to Burgundian origins, while phonological influences affected the development of regional French dialects in areas of sustained contact with Burgundian populations. The preservation of these linguistic influences in modern regional speech patterns provides evidence for the depth and persistence of Burgundian cultural impact on European linguistic development. Archaeological discoveries throughout the former Burgundian territories have revolutionized modern understanding of early medieval material culture, settlement patterns, and social organization through the recovery of substantial artifact assemblages and the systematic investigation of settlement sites that reveal the complexity of Burgundian society. Excavations conducted since the mid-20th century have uncovered evidence of sophisticated craft production, extensive trade networks, and complex social hierarchies that challenge earlier assumptions about the nature of post-Roman Germanic societies. The material evidence reveals technological capabilities, artistic achievements, and economic relationships that demonstrate the advanced nature of Burgundian civilization during its period of independent development. The metalworking capabilities revealed through archaeological investigation demonstrate the sophisticated technical knowledge possessed by Burgundian craftsmen and the extensive trade networks that provided access to raw materials and finished products from throughout Europe and beyond. Archaeological analysis of Burgundian weapons reveals advanced metallurgical techniques, including pattern welding, differential hardening, and complex alloy compositions that created tools and weapons of exceptional quality and durability. The presence of specialized workshop areas at major settlement sites indicates the development of craft specialization and professional artisan classes that could support sustained production of high-quality metalwork for both local consumption and long-distance trade. Jewellery and decorative metalwork recovered from Burgundian archaeological contexts reveal artistic traditions that combine Germanic symbolic systems with influences absorbed from contact with Roman, Byzantine, and other cultural traditions. The technical sophistication of these productions indicates the presence of highly skilled craftsmen capable of working with precious metals and employing complex decoration techniques, including filigree, granulation, and cloisonne enamel work. The stylistic development evident in archaeological sequences reveals the evolution of distinctively Burgundian artistic traditions that maintained recognizable characteristics while adapting to changing cultural influences and technical innovations. Settlement pattern analysis based on archaeological survey and excavation reveals the complex territorial organization that characterized Burgundian society and the sophisticated approaches to land use and resource management that supported substantial populations in diverse environmental contexts. The distribution of settlement sites reveals hierarchical relationships between major centres and smaller dependent communities, while the internal organisation of individual settlements demonstrates social differentiation and functional specialisation that reflects complex political and economic structures. Archaeological evidence for agricultural intensification, craft production, and commercial activities reveals the economic foundations that supported Burgundian political development and territorial expansion. Burial practices documented through systematic cemetery excavation provide detailed insights into Burgundian social organisation, religious beliefs, and cultural values that supplement and often correct the limited information available from written sources. The analysis of grave goods reveals social stratification based on wealth, status, and gender roles, while burial orientation and cemetery organisation reflect religious beliefs and community structures. The evolution of burial practices over time reveals processes of cultural change and religious transformation that affected Burgundian society during its centuries of development and integration into broader European political systems. The influence of Burgundian legal traditions on European jurisprudence extended far beyond the immediate territories of the former kingdom to affect the development of legal systems throughout medieval and early modern Europe. The sophisticated legal codes developed during the independent kingdom's existence provided models for legal synthesis that influenced the development of customary law throughout France and other European territories. The Burgundian emphasis on written legal codes, procedural regularity, and the integration of different legal traditions created precedents that would influence European legal development for centuries. The concept of feudal obligation and territorial authority that developed within Burgundian political structures contributed significantly to the evolution of European feudalism and the relationship between royal authority and territorial autonomy. The Burgundian approach to governing diverse populations through flexible, institutional arrangements that preserved local traditions while maintaining unified political authority provided models that would influence European political development throughout the medieval period. The balance between central authority and regional autonomy that characterized Burgundian governance created precedents for constitutional development that would affect European political evolution into the modern period. The preservation of Burgundian cultural identity within broader European political frameworks demonstrates the resilience of regional traditions and the capacity for cultural synthesis that enable the survival of distinctive local characteristics despite political transformation and integration into larger political entities. Modern Burgundy retains cultural traditions, architectural styles, and social practices that can be traced to the medieval period of independent development. While contemporary regional identity continues to reflect the historical experiences that shaped local communities during centuries of political evolution, the wine-producing traditions that developed in Burgundian territories during the medieval period established the foundation for one of Europe's most prestigious viticultural regions, with cultivation techniques, varietal selection, and quality standards that continue to influence global wine production. Archaeological evidence reveals the systematic development of vineyard cultivation during the medieval period, with monastic communities playing crucial roles in developing the technical expertise and quality standards that would establish Burgundy's international reputation. The preservation of traditional cultivation methods and the continuation of family-based production systems demonstrate the persistence of cultural practices that connect modern Burgundy to its medieval origins. The architectural heritage that survives throughout the former Burgundian territories provides tangible evidence of the cultural achievements and artistic sophistication that characterized the region during its periods of independent development. Romanesque churches, ducal palaces, and monastic complexes demonstrate the architectural innovations and artistic achievements that emerged from the synthesis of different cultural traditions within Burgundian political frameworks. The preservation of these architectural monuments and their continued use for religious, cultural, and civic purposes demonstrates the enduring relevance of Burgundian cultural traditions within modern European society. The scholarly traditions that developed at Burgundian monasteries and courts, contributed significantly to the preservation and transmission of classical learning while fostering intellectual innovations that would influence European cultural development throughout the medieval and early modern periods. The manuscript collections, educational institutions, and scholarly networks that emerged from Burgundian patronage created intellectual resources that would serve European learning for centuries, while establishing precedents for the relationship between political authority and cultural patronage that would influence European development into the modern period. The historical impact of Burgundian civilization extends far beyond the immediate chronological and geographic boundaries of the kingdoms and duchies that bore the Burgundian name, to encompass fundamental contributions to European political, legal, cultural, and economic development that continue to influence modern society. The synthesis of Germanic and Roman traditions that characterize Burgundian development provided models for cultural integration and political organization that would shape European civilization throughout the medieval period and beyond. The preservation of Burgundian cultural identity within modern European regional consciousness demonstrates the enduring significance of historical experiences that created distinctive local traditions while contributing to broader patterns of European development. The legacy of the Burgundians thus represents not merely the history of a particular Germanic tribe or medieval political entity, but rather a crucial component of the broader processes of cultural synthesis, political innovation, and social development that created the foundations of modern European civilization. From their origins along the Vistula River to their final integration into the Habsburg dominions, the Burgundians participated in and shaped the fundamental transformations that created medieval and early modern Europe, leaving cultural, legal, and political legacies that continue to influence contemporary society, while providing historical examples of successful cultural adaptation and political innovation that remain relevant to modern challenges of cultural diversity and political integration.